Hi guys. Tonight we drift back into a world where winter does not politely knock, but barges in with icy elbows, where you feel the cold settle into your bones the moment you step outside. You stand at the edge of a muddy medieval village, the daylight already fading even though it is barely late afternoon, and you sense that the first harsh breath of winter is sliding across the fields. Your breath hangs in the air like a fragile ghost, and you probably will not survive this if you show up dressed like a modern tourist with a hoodie and optimism. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And because it is my favorite ritual, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. You begin to trudge along the narrow path between cottages, your boots sinking slightly into cold, stiffening earth. The village smells of wood smoke and damp straw. Someone is chopping logs nearby, the steady thok of the axe echoing between wattle walls. Winter is not fully here yet, but everyone can feel it approaching, the way a farmer senses a storm long before clouds gather. A mainstream historical fact rises naturally as you look around. In Northern Europe during the Middle Ages, peasants spent autumn frantically preparing for winter, because failure to do so meant real danger, not just a chilly inconvenience. You feel that truth pressing into you now. Women bend over baskets piling in the last of the carrots and turnips. A man leads two shaggy goats toward shelter, their hooves clicking over frozen ruts. Children carry bundles of brushwood almost as big as their bodies. You cannot help noticing how early darkness falls. This was normal in their world. Oil for lamps was precious, candles even more so. Light, real light, was a luxury. You pause as a sudden gust of wind rushes past, sending a spray of leaves tumbling across the path. It feels like a warning. This is the moment villagers mentally shift into winter mode. Food must be stored. The roof must be checked for thatch slipping out of place. Loose boards need to be hammered down. Every tiny gap becomes a draft waiting to torment sleepless nights. A quirky tidbit slips into your awareness as you watch a woman stuffing moss between the beams of her cottage. Moss and mud, surprisingly, sometimes made better insulation than rags, especially when the rags were needed for patching clothes. The smell of damp moss lingers sweet and earthy. You wonder how many layers of it lie hidden inside these walls, quietly holding back the cold like a secret ally. You turn and glance at the open fields. The soil is already hardening into a surface that looks deceptively smooth under the pale sky. A few strips of land hold the last stubborn cabbages clinging to life. You sense how precarious everything becomes once the ground freezes. Food does not grow. You do not get a second chance. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were more fearful of the cold itself or of the hunger that almost always accompanied it. As you watch the families rush to secure what little they have, you feel that both fears whisper through the air at once. You walk closer to a house where a man is testing the strength of wooden shutters. They close inward with a dull thud, shutting out more than wind. They shut out the long winter nights that stretch for hours beyond what you are used to. Nights when even the bravest among them feel the press of darkness. The long silence punctuated only by crackling fires and restless animals shifting in their stalls. Someone calls out to you, motioning toward a stack of split firewood. You pick up a piece. The bark flakes slightly under your fingers, rough and dry. Wood like this is not just fuel, it is survival itself. Without enough wood, families freeze. With too much green wood, they choke on smoke. Everything is a delicate balance in a world without convenience stores or thermostats. The crows overhead seem to sense the mood. They circle once, then settle along the ridge of a barn, ruffling their feathers. Their calls sound sharper now, as if the cold has changed their voices too. As you continue down the lane, you brush against a wall of woven branches coated with a thin crust of early frost. You feel its bite, even through gloves. The air smells faintly metallic. Winter carries that scent like its signature. People greet each other briskly, not stopping for long chats. There is too much to do. A woman hurries past carrying a pot of lard that will be used to waterproof boots and maybe soothe cracked skin. A boy runs after her with a handful of dried herbs that will freshen the air in the house once the doors stay shut for days at a time. You imagine the cramped, smoky interior, cozy in theory, suffocating in practice. A pig squeals from a small pen as someone tries to coax it inside for the night. Animals share warmth, but animals also stink. This is the trade-off peasants know all too well. You watch as the creature finally plods inside, its breath steaming like a dragon pretending to be harmless. You step closer to a storage hut where a young couple is stacking sacks of grain. Their movements are slow and deliberate. They count each sack, tighten each rope. You can see the tension in their shoulders. One mistake now could cost them dearly in February. The cold does not kill quickly. It wears you down, day after day. A dog trots by, its fur thick and bristling. It gives you a quick glance before detouring toward a warm spot near a cottage door. Even animals know where heat leaks out. The sky darkens further, yet it is not quite night. This strange half-light feels ancient, as though your body instinctively knows it should already be indoors with a cloak wrapped tight and a bowl of something hot in hand. But you keep wandering, feeling the cold settle deeper into your clothing. You notice smoke rising from nearly every chimney now. That smoky haze drifts low, clinging to rooftops. It smells comforting and abrasive at the same time. A medieval winter always smells like this. Smoke is unavoidable. People live inside it. In one doorway, two villagers are discussing something softly. You cannot hear much, just a few words about a neighbor who is late bringing in his wheat. Their expressions shift between concern and judgment. Winter has a way of making everyone watch one another closely. A single, unprepared household could become a desperate household by January. As you approach the edge of the village again, you feel how the air outside the cluster of homes is colder, heavier, almost solemn. Out here, winter reigns. In there, humans push back with fires, shared labor, and rough-woven blankets. You pause for a long moment, absorbing it. The looming season forces everyone to think ahead. Winter strips away illusions. You cannot pretend things are fine if the roof leaks or the grain is low. You cannot bluff your way through months of freezing temperatures and long nights. And maybe that stark honesty is part of what kept medieval communities tightly bound. You take one slow breath. The cold stings, but the village glows like a cluster of ember hearts keeping the darkness at bay. You are ready to step closer, to see what else must be done before the true winter arrives. You move toward the nearest cottage now, letting your fingers glide over the rough wattle wall as you approach the doorway. The timber feels cold, almost damp, and you sense how much work stands between this structure and a bearable winter night. Every peasant in this village knows the truth you are about to see with your own eyes. A house in the Middle Ages does not protect you by default. You must constantly coax it into cooperating. One mainstream historical fact comes to mind as you look at the sagging thatch roof above you. Most medieval peasants lived in simple timber-framed houses filled with wattle and daub, a mix of clay, straw, and dung that created a surprisingly sturdy surface, but required frequent repairs to survive harsh winters. You feel those repairs waiting in every crack. You push the door slightly and step inside, letting the dimness swallow you. The air is still, smelling faintly of old smoke and damp straw. The interior walls look like a patchwork quilt, made from whatever materials the family could scavenge. Someone has spent the last few days stuffing handfuls of straw, moss, hair, and anything resembling insulation into gaps where the wind sneaks through. A quirky tidbit emerges as you brush your hand across a newly patched seam. Some households even used mixtures of animal dung and chopped plant fibers as a type of winter plaster, believing it blocked drafts better than cleaner materials. Oddly enough, it often did. You take a slow step forward, hearing the faint crunch of cold earth beneath your boots. The floor is little more than packed dirt, with a few rushes scattered across the center to keep feet from freezing. You crouch down to examine them. They are brittle and pale, signs that another fresh layer will need to be added soon. Even indoors, winter has a way of creeping upward from the ground like an invisible tide. The household has already tried to fight it off by piling dried bracken and straw beneath a thin layer of reeds. Near the far wall, you notice a bench pushed almost flush against the daub. A draft snakes along your ankles as you walk toward it. You realize why the family placed the bench here. By pushing furniture against the coldest walls, they help trap leaks, or at least redirect them. It is a strategy born not from comfort, but from necessity. Historians still debate whether these houses were truly as drafty as modern people imagine, or whether peasant families were simply used to levels of cold we would immediately protest. As you run your hand along the chilled surface of the inner wall, you suspect the answer lies somewhere in the middle. The cold is present, yes, but the layers of daub, the packed insulation, and the low ceiling all create a kind of cocoon, a chilly cocoon, but still a cocoon. You straighten up and study the wooden beams overhead. They look like huge rib bones holding the structure together. Thatch bulges downward slightly between them. Someone has recently climbed onto the roof to tighten the thatch ropes, tying them firmly so winter winds do not rip away whole sections. If the roof leaks in January, there is no easy fix. Climbing onto a slippery, ice-covered roof could end a life faster than the cold ever would. Outside, you hear muffled voices. A man and a teenage boy enter carrying a bundle of reeds and branches. You step aside as they move to a drafty corner. The father stuffs reeds into small holes while the boy smears a mixture of mud and straw over the edges. Their movements are efficient, almost rhythmic. For them, this is not a special task, but simply what must happen every year. The boy glances at you for a moment, as if checking whether you understand the seriousness of the work. You do. Even one tiny opening can let in enough cold to make a difference. Winter is long. Winter is relentless. Winter punishes laziness. As you step deeper inside the room, your eyes adjust to the low light. You notice the soot stain above the hearth, stretching outward like a blackened halo. Smoke has clearly seeped through every crack in the roof over the years. You tap the wall near the hearth and feel how warm the daub is, still holding on to heat from earlier in the day. Heat retention is its hidden strength. You look upward and notice bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. Some are meant for cooking, some for sickness, and some simply because the family believes they repel cold spirits. Superstition mingles easily with practicality in this time. Nothing is wasted, not even beliefs. You continue walking around the single room, noting how every object doubles as insulation. Spare clothes hang along the walls, not just to dry but to block drafts. Animal hides line the sleeping area to trap warmth. Even baskets are stacked strategically to fill empty space where cold might gather. You reach the door again and notice the heavy wooden latch. It is wrapped in cloth to keep it from freezing and sticking. The woman of the house steps in from outside carrying a bundle of sheep wool. Without speaking, she kneels near the wall and begins tucking wisps of wool into a narrow slit along the floor. She works quickly, her fingers red and rough. Wool is a precious resource, but a small amount spent now can save aching bones later. The smell of cooked barley still lingers in the air. The family likely ate earlier, not because they were hungry, but because the meal helps warm the house. Heat rises from boiling pots and lingers long after the food is gone. You feel the faint warmth still clinging to the hearthstones. A chill drifts through the room as another gust rattles the shutters. You watch how everyone glances toward the sound, instinctively checking whether the wood holds. Winter has a way of making people listen to their homes like living creatures. You listen too. The house creaks and sighs. It is adjusting to the cold just as the people are. You step outside again to examine the exterior. The thatch forms thick layers above your head, nearly a foot deep in some spots. A well-maintained roof is both the pride and the survival of the household. Thatch naturally repels water, and when arranged correctly, it can insulate astonishingly well. But it also attracts birds, insects, and sometimes rodents. You see a few stones placed across the ridge to secure it from storms. Walking around the cottage, you see more signs of preparation. A pile of clay near the wall suggests someone has been repairing daub throughout autumn. Wooden boards lean against the lower wall, awaiting placement if the wind grows fierce. A tangle of brushwood is stacked nearby to add as emergency windbreaks. It all feels fragile, yet strangely resilient. You realize medieval houses survive the same way medieval people do, not by perfection, but by constant adjustment. You take a deep breath. The cold nips at your face, but the cottage behind you stands firm, sturdy in its patched-together way. Inside it, the family has done what they can. The rest will be up to luck, weather, and the quiet endurance that defines peasant life. Winter is coming fast, and now you understand just how much preparation these simple shelters require to stand even a fighting chance against the season you are stepping toward. You step back inside the cottage, letting the door settle behind you with a gentle thump, and your eyes drift immediately toward the single most important feature of any medieval home in winter, the hearth. It stands in the center of the room, like a patient animal, dark for the moment, though the stones still hold a whisper of heat. You feel it on your shins before you even get close. This small, smoky heart is what keeps the entire household alive. One mainstream historical fact settles naturally into your awareness as you watch the woman place kindling on the embers. In medieval Europe, the hearth was not just a cooking place, but the primary heat source, and households often kept a fire going for weeks without letting it fully extinguish. You can sense why. Starting a fire each morning in brutal cold is not convenient, and losing the flame entirely could cost precious time and fuel. You crouch near the hearth, feeling the stones radiate warmth. They are rough to the touch, mottled from years of use. built from whatever the family could gather from nearby fields or riverbeds. There is something almost sacred about this spot. Families slept close to it, cooked every meal over it, dried their clothes beside it, and sometimes even warmed newborns in its glow. The faint crackle beneath the ashes tells you the fire is drowsy, waiting for breath. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you study the hearth more closely. Some peasants believed that letting the fire die completely invited misfortune, even evil spirits that loved cold corners and dark rooms. Because of that, families might keep a single coal wrapped in ash or placed in a small clay pot overnight. Whether or not the superstition mattered, the practice worked. A tiny ember could make morning kindling flare quickly, saving both time and freezing fingers. You watch the woman lift a small bundle of twigs and dried leaves. She leans close, blows softly, and the ember glows brighter. A thin thread of smoke curls upward, searching for a way out. The hearth sits on an open floor without a chimney in the modern sense. Instead, smoke escapes through a small vent or simply drifts upward to the thatch, where it seeps out slowly. This is why medieval homes so often smell smoky. It is a smell that clings to clothing, hair, food, everything. You breathe in the scent and feel it settle inside your throat like a low hum. Historians still question how comfortable these smoky interiors truly were. Some argue that the constant haze must have been unbearable, while others insist that people became accustomed to it, even appreciating how smoke-preserved meat hung from the rafters and helped deter insects. As you blink through the faint mist gathering overhead, you suspect that medieval lungs probably suffered more than anyone admitted, but the benefits of smoke made the discomfort worth tolerating. The fire starts to wake up. Small flames lick upward, orange and lively. The heat reaches your hands and feels instantly comforting, like sinking into a warm bath. You stretch your fingers toward it, aware that people in this time often rotated chores around the hearth simply to soak up moments of warmth. Mending clothes, sorting beans, brushing wool, soothing a child. Everything feels easier beside the fire. The boy you saw earlier enters with a small armful of logs. He stacks them neatly next to the hearth. Wood is precious, and the family burns it sparingly. First, the weakest flames get twigs and stick ends, then thin branches, then logs only after the fire declares itself strong enough. If you burn through wood too fast, you end the winter shivering. If you burn too little, you freeze anyway. This is the balance every household must learn. You look up toward the roof. Dark smoke stains mark decades of rising soot. Some thatched houses had open smoke holes, others did not, relying instead on the slow leaking of haze through walls and gaps. Smoke drifts upward in lazy ribbons, painting the air with grey slopes. It curls around herbs tied to beams, dries out hides hung there, and leaves everything tinted with a dull, dusky shadow. The woman sets a small pot on the stones, letting it warm gradually. You can guess its contents just by the smell. Onions, barley, maybe a little fat skimmed from yesterday's stew. The sound of bubbling broth is like a lullaby in this world. A meal cooked over an open flame is both sustenance and warmth, two things inseparable in peasant life. The door opens again, and a young girl slips inside, shaking off the cold. She heads straight for the fire without a word, her hands trembling slightly. She sits on a low stool, leaning in until the firelight softens her face. The warmth spreads across her cheeks, turning them pink. You sense just how many winter evenings she will spend exactly like this. The father takes a seat near the hearth too, a long-handled tool in hand. He pokes the fire, adjusting the burning logs with practiced ease. Sparks jump, tiny bright insects darting upward, before fading into the air. You watch them dance and vanish. The fire hisses softly, still half asleep. You glance at the walls where several clay pots rest in niches near the hearth. Their contents vary: salt, herbs, rendered fat, and sometimes water that must never be allowed to freeze. Even a thin sheen of ice can shatter a fragile clay vessel. Keeping these jars near the hearth protects them. A cat appears, seemingly conjured from nowhere, stretching luxuriously before curling up in a warm pocket between the stones and a wooden bench. Animals know warmth better than anyone. The cat begins to purr, a faint vibration carried through the floor. The fire deepens in color. You hear that satisfying crackle that makes your shoulders relax. It is not just about heat, it is about the sound, the movement, the promise that for at least a little while the family is safe from the cold gnawing at the walls. You imagine a long winter night when this fire must be fed slowly, carefully, to keep from burning out before dawn. Someone will wake every few hours to check it. often the mother, sometimes the eldest daughter. Sleep is never uninterrupted in this world. Survival does not allow it. You draw closer, warming your hands again. The children lean in too, sharing the heat like a circle of planets orbiting a tiny sun. The glow flickers across their faces, turning each expression soft and thoughtful. You realize the hearth is more than a tool. It is the center of stories, of gossip, of whispered fears, of quiet laughter. It is the one place where winter feels almost gentle, where the family can breathe deeply and forget, just for a moment, how dangerous the world outside becomes at night. As you stare into the flames, they shift and dance, casting wavering shadows across the room. The walls look alive. The roof beams glow softly overhead. This is the heart of winter survival, the warmth that steadies a household through storms, sickness, hunger, and isolation. The fire snaps loudly, startling the cat. Everyone laughs softly, the sound warm and fragile. You feel yourself drawn deeper into the glow, knowing that without this ancient, smoky guardian, medieval winter would be far too much for human bodies to bear. You let the heat sink into you fully. It is time to stay close. Winter is only beginning. You leave the hearth behind and step toward a corner where several garments hang from wooden pegs, their silhouettes bulky and shapeless in the dim firelight. As you draw closer, you can feel the rough weight of winter clothing even before you touch it. Wool cloaks, patched tunics, layered linen shirts, and heavy hose sway gently when you brush past, whispering secrets about the way people survive bitter nights. One well-accepted detail from the period becomes clear the moment your fingers graze a coarse wool sleeve. Medieval peasants depended heavily on homespun wool because it trapped heat remarkably well, even when damp, a life-saving trait in freezing months. You lift a tunic from its peg and feel the stiffness of its fibers. It scratches your skin through your own clothing. The lanolin has partly washed out over years of wear, leaving the cloth dry and prickly. Yet this uncomfortable texture is part of its charm. It is warmth disguised as nuisance. You slip your hand inside and find a hidden layer of linen stitched beneath the wool. This inner layer is softer, smoother, and meant to protect the skin from that relentless scratch. Layering is everything. No single garment fights winter alone. Instead, each piece works with the next, building a barrier of warmth in slow, patient steps. You inhale, and the faint smell of lanolin and smoke reaches your nose. It is not unpleasant, just earthy, familiar, lived in. Clothing in this world is never fresh from a closet. It collects the sense of daily tasks, of hearth fires, of the outdoors, of animals, of cold mornings and warm nights. The fabric has a memory. As you explore the garments, a curious little detail surfaces in your mind. Some villagers stitched dried herbs or seeds into tiny cloth pouches sewn inside necklines or sleeves, believing the scent could keep illness at bay or simply mask the smell of sweat trapped under layers. A sprig of dried lavender or rosemary tucked discreetly near the collar brought both fragrance and superstition into the daily routine. You notice a pair of woolen hose hanging nearby. When you pick them up, they feel heavy, almost waterlogged, even though they are dry. The dense weave traps warmth but also soaks up moisture. Peasants wore these hose in multiple layers when traveling through snow or frost. You stretch the fabric slightly and watch it resist like a stubborn muscle. These were not delicate garments. They were built to survive harsh work. As you move deeper into the room, you see a wooden chest propped open beside a straw mattress. Inside lies an assortment of winter accessories, mittens made from rough-spun wool, a narrow hood lined with scraps of soft fur, a thick scarf made from braided strips of old cloth, its colors faded into one muted tone. You run your fingers over each item, feeling their textures, sensing the lives woven into them. Not all experts see this the same way, but there is ongoing discussion about how frequently peasants owned fur. Some believe fur-lined garments were rare, reserved mostly for wealthier households. Others suggest that small scraps of rabbit or squirrel fur were commonly used to reinforce collars and cuffs. As you lift a hood lined with uneven tufts of rabbit fur, you can see why the debate persists. It is simple, worn, and clearly repaired more than once. A treasure, but not an extravagant one. You move to the bed space, where a mound of blankets is heaped together. You unfold one and find it made from layers of coarse wool, stitched together loosely. The blanket is heavy, almost suffocating, but when you wrap it around your shoulders, warmth blooms instantly along your arms and spine. This is comfort without softness. the kind of warmth that presses down and makes you feel anchored. Beneath the blanket lies another, thinner one made of linen. Linen does not insulate as well as wool, but it feels far better on the skin. The combination is perfect. First the linen for comfort, then the wool for heat. Clothing, bedding, even floor coverings all follow the same logic. Layer upon layer upon layer. You sit on the edge of the straw mattress, sinking slightly. Straw shifts beneath you with a soft crackle. People sleep in all their clothes during winter, sometimes even wearing cloaks to bed. You imagine lying down here with a linen shirt, wool tunic, outer coat, hose, leg wrappings, mittens, maybe even a cap pulled down over the ears. Cold air sneaks into every gap, but clothing becomes your armor. Next to the bed, a woman kneels beside a basket overflowing with fleece. She uses a drop spindle, twisting wool fibers into thread. Her movements are slow and steady. You believe she could do this with her eyes closed. The rhythmic sound of the spindle spinning and tapping against her palm gives the room a soft, sleepy cadence. The family depends on her skill. When garments tear or thin, it is her job to mend them. She holds up a tunic, worn nearly translucent at the elbows. With needle and thread, she begins patching it with small squares of wool. The stitches are not neat, but they are strong. In this world, beauty comes second to durability. The man sitting near the hearth adds another log to the fire, and warmth spreads outward. The heat hits your legs first, then climbs to your chest. Clothing absorbs and releases heat slowly, so the more layers you wear, the longer that warmth stays with you. You can feel the difference instantly when you draw the wool blanket tighter around your shoulders. You glance again at the wooden pegs where garments hang. Some look old enough to belong to grandparents long gone. Clothing was expensive to produce, and families passed garments down until they practically dissolved. A tunic might have lived through decades, surviving repairs, patches, tears, and seasons of heavy use. You walk to the small window shuttered tightly against the cold. A rolled cloth is stuffed along the bottom edge to block creeping drafts. The cloth is patched with small squares of dyed linen that add unexpected color to the otherwise dim room. Clothing scraps always found purpose. Nothing was wasted. In one corner, a pair of tall boots waits for the next journey outside. The leather is cracked, stiff with cold, and lined with wool pads. You touch the inside and feel its warmth lingering. Boots like these are essential for walking snowy fields or muddy tracks. Without them, frostbite is only a few steps away. A girl enters, carrying a basket of freshly washed linen shirts. She sets them near the hearth to dry. Laundry in winter is a rare task because wet clothes are nearly impossible to dry in the cold. These shirts were likely washed during a brief warm spell. You lift one and catch the scent of wood smoke clinging to the fibers. You sit again, letting the weight of your borrowed wool cloak settle across your shoulders. The fire flickers, its light painting the room in gentle orange strokes. Clothing in this world is more than fabric. It is shelter. It is armor. It is the only thing that travels with you everywhere you go. As the warmth from the hearth deepens, you feel how the layers around you soften the cold that still seeps through the walls. You understand why medieval winter clothing feels heavy and crude to us. It is not meant for fashion. It is meant for survival. You take one last look at the shelves of garments, each one holding tight to the memories of winters past. You adjust your own layers, preparing for the next step in your journey through this icy season. You leave the warmth of the layered garments behind and drift toward a low doorway at the back of the cottage. The air cools noticeably as you step closer. A faint, earthy smell seeps upward through the cracks in the floorboards, reminding you that beneath this home lies something essential to winter survival. The woman of the house lifts a rough wooden trapdoor with both hands, and a breath of cold, soil-rich air spills into the room. She gestures for you to follow, and you descend a few creaking steps into the storage cellar, where the real heart of winter lies, waiting in silence. Your boots touch compacted dirt. The cellar is dim, lit only by a small tallow candle flickering in the woman's hand. The flame makes long shadows dance across the walls, revealing shelves, baskets, sacks, and bundles organized with quiet urgency. It is generally agreed by historians that rural families relied heavily on underground or semi-buried storage spaces like this to keep food safe from frost, rodents, and rot. You feel the cold lingering here, not harsh enough to freeze what is stored, but persistent enough to keep it from spoiling quickly. You take a few slow steps deeper into the space. Straw rustles under your feet. Baskets of turnips and carrots sit close to the floor, carefully layered with dry sand to keep them from drying out. You brush your fingers lightly over a turnip, its surface firm and cold, as if it has been asleep for weeks. These root vegetables are not luxuries but lifelines, dependable and dull, able to last until spring if handled with care. A curious detail from the period emerges as you examine a shelf lined with shallow clay bowls. Each bowl holds apples sunken into beds of straw. Some medieval households stored apples individually wrapped in leaves, or even submerged them in barrels of cool water. The practice might seem strange now, but it helped keep the fruit edible long past the harvest months. You imagine the joy of biting into something sweet in late February, when the world outside is still grey and frozen. You turn toward a darker corner, where several sacks hang from wooden pegs hammered into the ceiling beams. Suspended food is safer from mice and dampness. You tug gently on one of the sacks and feel the soft clatter of grains shifting inside. Oats or barley, perhaps. Grain is precious, the backbone of winter meals. Bread, porridge, soup, everything starts here. A single torn sack could mean weeks of hunger. You notice bundles of dried herbs braided into ropes. Their scents linger faintly in the air. Sage, thyme, mint, maybe a little dill. These herbs are not merely seasonings. They serve as medicine, tea, pest repellents, and even talismans of comfort. Their presence makes the cellar feel more alive, even though everything stored here is meant to sleep through winter. You kneel near a stack of clay jars sealed with wax. When you lift one, it is heavier than it looks. Preserved beans, dried peas, rendered animal fat, or maybe salted fish fill these containers. The woman taps one jar lightly and smiles with a kind of weary pride. Every jar represents long hours of work from summer and autumn. Without them, winter would be unforgiving. Some researchers continue to disagree about how widespread certain preservation methods were, especially among poorer households. For instance, whether smoking meat was common everywhere or mainly practiced in certain regions remains an open question. Yet as you look at the small rack of smoked strips hanging overhead, you understand that techniques varied as much as families did. What mattered was endurance, not uniformity. A low wooden barrel catches your eye. You lift its lid and inhale gently. The smell of fermented cabbage and brine greets you immediately. Sauerkraut of a medieval sort. It may lack modern seasoning, but it provides vital vitamins during months when fresh greens are nearly impossible to find. You gently replace the lid, feeling respect for its sour strength. Further along, you find a basket covered with cloth. You lift the corner and see shriveled onions with papery skins. Onions store surprisingly well in cool places, and their flavor wakes up even the sleepiest winter meal. Another basket holds dried mushrooms gathered from nearby forests before the frosts arrived. Their earthy scent rises faintly as you brush them with your fingertips. The walls of the cellar glisten slightly with cold moisture. You run your hand across them, feeling how the thick earth provides natural insulation. This chill is not hostile, it is controlled, almost nurturing. It protects what must last. In this world, understanding the land means understanding how to use it as a pantry. You step toward a set of shelves lined with small pottery jugs. You lift one and shake it gently. Something thick moves inside. Oil or fat, perhaps. These are cooking essentials, and rationing them is a delicate calculation. Too much used early, and the family suffers later. Too little, and every meal becomes thin and unsatisfying. In another corner, loaves of hard, dark bread sit stacked, each one baked to last weeks. The crust is so thick you could probably use it as a hammer. This bread is not something you slice with ease. It is something you soak in broth, gnaw slowly, or crumble into stew. It keeps hunger at a respectful distance. A shallow wooden box holds dried beans, their colors muted in the dim light. Beside them are small clay bottles sealed with lumps of wax. You pick one up and smell a faint sweetness. Mead, perhaps, or honey water. Honey keeps indefinitely, making it one of the most cherished winter supplies. A spoonful of sweetness in December is almost a celebration. You notice a bundle of straw-wrapped bottles tucked into a shelf. These might hold vinegar, an essential preservative. A thin sheen of frost clings to the bottles, but the contents remain liquid. Vinegar was used to pickle vegetables, tenderize tough meat, clean surfaces, and even soothe throats. A humble hero of the medieval pantry. Then, beside a heavy wooden crate, you notice a piece of cloth covering something large. You lift the cloth slowly and reveal a salted joint of meat. Its surface is grainy from coarse salt. The smell is strong but reassuring. Salt is expensive and precious, but it turns perishable meat into something that can last through midwinter. A young boy follows you down the ladder carrying new onions from above. He adds them to the storage with the seriousness of someone handling treasure. You watch him arrange them carefully, checking each one for soft spots or signs of rot. Every small decision made here ripples through the winter months. Off to the side, you spot small earthen pots with lids tied with string. You open one and find preserved berries suspended in thick syrup. The tart smell makes your mouth water slightly. This is not everyday food. This is medicine, energy, and rare comfort for the sick or weary. You run your fingers along a wooden shelf where thin strips of dried fish lie resting. The salt crystals sparkle faintly in the candlelight. These strips will be added to soups and stews, stretching nutrition without using precious fresh meat. The cold air settles around your legs as you explore further. It is strangely calming, like stepping into a place that exists outside time. Everything here waits patiently, quietly, obedient to the rhythms of winter. You step back toward the ladder after touring each corner of the cellar. The woman climbs up first and reaches her hand down to help you. When you emerge into the warmer room above, you feel a quiet gratitude for the underground world you have just seen. Food stored in silence is food that whispers its promise through the coldest nights. Upstairs, the fire crackles softly. Down here, the cellar stands like a silent guardian. You close the trapdoor gently and feel the weight of winter preparations settle into your thoughts. Without this careful planning, survival would be a wish rather than a strategy. The house creaks as wind brushes against its walls, but beneath your feet lies a season's worth of endurance. You step forward, ready to move through the next moments of winter life, warmed by the knowledge of what waits below. You rise from the cellar and step back toward the hearth, where a pot now simmers gently, sending lazy spirals of steam toward the rafters. The aroma is simple but comforting, a soft mixture of grain, onions, and maybe a scrap of salted meat. You settle onto a low stool, feeling the heat of the fire wrap around your legs, and realize that this moment captures the rhythm of winter meals in the Middle Ages. Humble, repetitive, nourishing in the most practical sense. Records from the era make it clear that for most peasant families, winter food was not about pleasure. It was about sustaining strength when the cold threatened to drain it away. The woman of the house lifts the lid of the pot. A thick, slow-moving porridge bubbles inside, barley or oats perhaps, stirred until the grains surrender into a creamy base. She takes a wooden ladle and scoops a small amount into a bowl. The steam strokes your face, carrying notes of warmth that sink into your chest. She adds a pinch of dried herbs, likely thyme or sage, saved from the summer garden. Even tiny touches like this transform monotony into a small comfort. You take a spoonful, and the flavor is mild, almost shy. It fills your mouth in a soft wave, spreading heat through you. This is not the sort of food that makes your eyes widen with delight. It is the kind that makes your shoulders loosen, that reassures your stomach it will not be empty tonight. You swallow slowly, feeling the grainy texture, the faint earthiness, the distant echo of sunlight captured months ago. You glance around the room. The children are already dipping their wooden spoons into their own bowls, eating with the steady rhythm of people who know this meal well. A crust of yesterday's bread sits nearby, waiting to be dunked into the thick porridge. The bread is dark, dense, and tough, but when softened in the warm liquid, it becomes easier to chew. This is how stale food gains new life. A lesser-known practice pops into your mind as you observe the pot more closely. Some medieval households added a small, heated stone into their cooking vessels to keep stews warm longer without burning extra fuel. You imagine the shock of hot stone meeting broth, the hiss, the tiny bubbles racing upward. Whether this family uses the trick or not, it shows how creativity often grew in the shadow of necessity. The father settles beside you, dipping his spoon with practiced ease. He does not eat quickly. Every mouthful is measured, not because he is savoring it, but because he knows the family must stretch their portions carefully. Winter is long, and the line between prudence and scarcity can be painfully thin. Not all scholars share the same opinion about how diverse the peasant winter diet truly was. Some claim it was rigid and monotonous, while others argue that even poor families found ways to vary flavors when possible. You look around the room and see evidence supporting both views. The ingredients are few, but the imagination is strong. A handful of herbs, a pinch of dried berries, maybe a bit of fat or a spoonful of honey added on rare days when spirits need lifting. A soft clatter draws your attention to a small table where a jug of thin ale sits uncorked. The ale is weak, but drinking water untreated can be risky, especially in winter when freezing temperatures compromise wells. The ale carries little alcohol, just enough fermentation to keep it safe. You take a sip. It is sour, a little yeasty, but refreshing in its own way. It washes down the porridge and warms your throat. The girl next to you has a small bowl filled with something slightly different. Tiny pieces of dried apple float in her porridge, turning soft and translucent as they cook. This little enhancement is probably a reward for her help with chores earlier. Watching her spoon up the fruit, you can almost hear her excitement in the soft giggle she tries to hide. On a low shelf, you notice a clay pot with a tight wax seal. The woman unwraps it and reveals a thick, pale substance: animal fat. Lard is often added to meals in winter to supplement calories. Without it, food fills the stomach, but does not necessarily fuel the body against biting cold. She scoops a small spoonful into the pot, stirring until it melts completely, adding richness without overwhelming the flavor. You peer into a corner where slabs of cheese rest wrapped in cloth. The cheese is firm, maybe even rock hard in places. Aging changes its flavor, making it sharper and saltier. The father cuts thin slices with a small knife. These slivers melt slowly on the tongue, adding a pleasant bite to the otherwise mild porridge. Even this small addition feels like a celebration. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, reminding everyone that the world beyond is barren and icy. Inside, the firelight glows and bowls clink softly. This contrast defines winter living: harsh cold outside, patient warmth inside. You feel it in your fingers as you curl them around your bowl. In another bowl on the nearby table, dried peas soak in water for tomorrow's meal. They will swell slowly overnight, ready to be transformed into a thick stew in the morning. Peas and beans carry families through winter when meat is too precious to use freely. Their quiet resilience mirrors the persistence of the people who rely on them. A small jar of honey sits on another shelf, guarded like treasure. Honey is not used casually. It is saved for sickness, exhaustion, or the rare moment when someone needs comfort more than calories. The woman touches the jar gently, as if debating whether tonight warrants a taste, but she sets it aside. The family remains cautious. Winter has only begun. You notice the boy gnawing on a piece of leftover salted fish. Its texture is tough, its flavor sharp and briny. He chews it patiently, dipping it into his porridge now and then to soften it. Fish like this is durable, dependable, but rarely delightful. Yet in winter, it becomes a steady companion. The man offers you a piece of dried pear. You take it, feeling its leathery surface between your fingers. The sweetness blooms slowly as you chew, a gentle reminder of autumn. Treats like this are rare but powerful. They awaken memories of warmth and sunlight, offering hope wrapped in flavor. Nearby, a mother's small pot of medicinal broth simmers quietly. Made from bones boiled for hours, it is thin but nourishing. The aroma carries notes of marrow and herbs. This broth is reserved for the youngest or the ailing. The idea of waste simply does not exist here. The fire crackles again, sending a wave of heat across your face. You take another spoonful of porridge and feel the warmth radiate through your chest. Everything about this meal is slow, steady, the culinary equivalent of a deep breath. You lean back for a moment, letting the sounds of spoons, fire, and soft conversation wash over you. This is winter sustenance, at its most honest, not rich, not exciting, but reliable, like a promise whispered every evening, reminding the family that as long as the pots simmer and the grains hold out, they can endure the cold. Meals like this form the rhythm of winter life, grounding the household in simple comforts and quiet determination. You finish your bowl, wiping the last traces with a piece of bread, and feel ready to step into the next part of the long, cold season. You wipe the last crumbs from your hands and drift toward the rear door of the cottage, where the muffled sound of shuffling hooves and low animal breaths filters into the room. When the father lifts the wooden latch, a gust of cold air slips in, but so does a thick, warm scent that feels strangely welcome after the sharp bite of winter. You step into the adjoining byre, a space shared by peasants and their animals through the coldest months. It becomes instantly clear why. It is generally accepted by medieval specialists that livestock provided not only food and labor, but also steady warmth, and bringing them indoors during winter could raise the temperature of an entire home by several degrees. Your boots sink slightly into the straw-covered floor. The ground here is warmer, softer, and carries the earthy aroma of cattle bodies pressed close together. A cow turns its large, gentle head toward you, exhaling a warm cloud that brushes your cheek. Their breath is thick, steaming, and surprisingly soothing in the dimness. The cow blinks slowly, as if half asleep, then shifts its weight with a soft grunt. The sound resonates through the room like a deep, sleepy drumbeat. You move deeper into the byre. The air is heavy with moisture, warmth, and the unmistakable scent of animals that have been indoors for weeks. It is not unpleasant in this moment. It feels lived in, like a wool blanket that has absorbed every memory of the season. A row of hens huddles together atop a beam overhead, feathers puffed into round, sleepy shapes. One of them clucks at you lazily, then tucks her head back under her wing. A curious detail from rural life slips into your mind as you observe the animals' arrangements. In some villages, smaller livestock like goats or sheep were brought into the very same room where families slept, not separated by walls but divided only by a low barrier or even a simple row of baskets. Their body heat was too precious to waste. It sounds primitive to modern ears, yet it worked astonishingly well for warming a small space on freezing nights. You pause beside a pig lying in a bed of straw, snoring with such contentment that the sound vibrates through the boards beneath your feet. The pig's thick hide radiates warmth, and its breath smells faintly of grain mash. You kneel slightly, touching the straw beside it. It is warm, not mildly warm, but genuinely heated by the animal's presence. You understand instantly why families kept pigs close until slaughter season. They were living heaters, snuffling and grumbling through the long nights. A goat tugs gently at your cloak, curious about whether you carry anything edible. You run your fingers along its coarse fur, feeling the strength under its skin. The goat shakes its head, little bells tied to its neck jingling softly. The sound feels festive in this dim, quiet space. Not all historians share the same view on how often livestock shared interior living areas. Some propose that it was common mostly in harsher climates, while others argue that even in milder regions, families brought the most vulnerable animals indoors for protection. As you stand here, surrounded by warm bodies and gentle noises, you sense why the practice persisted across so many areas. Winter is unforgiving, and losing an animal could mean losing milk, wool, meat, or future offspring. The father moves to check on the cow, running his hand along its flank. The cow leans into the touch with a low rumble. He inspects the straw beneath her, pats it, adds a new layer from a nearby bale, and ensures the area stays dry. Moisture means cold, and cold means illness. Even a minor sickness in winter can spiral quickly. He lifts a bucket of water from a corner and places it before the cows. The water sloshes softly, its surface steaming slightly in the warm air. You lean close and notice an iron hook hanging from one of the beams, with a small bundle of dried herbs tied to it. The scent drifts faintly above the animal pen. Some families believed these herbs kept sickness away from their livestock, especially during the cold months when damp conditions encouraged disease. Whether the belief was accurate or not, the habit lingers as evidence of hope stretched across generations. A hen suddenly flutters down from her perch, landing with a small puff of straw. She pecks around your boots, searching for crumbs. When she finds none, she lets out a soft, indignant chirp. Her feathers brush against your ankle, warm and surprisingly comforting. The byre is dim, but your eyes adjust to the soft glow filtering from the main room. You see movement everywhere. A sheep shifts its weight, nudging its lamb closer. A cow flicks its ear. A goat scratches its horns against the wooden post. These tiny gestures create a gentle, living soundtrack. The animals breathe, sigh, shuffle, and hum. Their sounds make the winter feel manageable. You reach for a bundle of hay stacked along the wall. The stalks are stiff and slightly sweet-smelling. The father takes some and scatters it along the floor. The animals move forward eagerly, their hooves rustling through the straw. You watch them eat, their jaws moving in slow, circular motions. There is a strange peace in watching a well-fed animal. Hunger belongs outside, not within these walls. The children enter the byre next. The younger one carries a small basket of scraps, peels, leftover porridge, and a bit of bread. She pours it into a wooden trough for the pig, who wakes instantly and trots over, snorting with enthusiasm. The children giggle and step back quickly to avoid being bumped by his eager snout. A small cat darts between your legs, chasing a shadow or maybe a mouse. It pauses near the cow's hooves, purring loudly, as if the animal warmth fuels its energy. Cats are essential in winter, reducing the mice that might otherwise chew through precious food stores. This one seems to know its importance. It walks with confidence, tail held high. The roof beams above you drip faintly where the warmth from the animals meets the cold seeping through the thatch. The droplets fall slowly, forming tiny frozen pearls near the walls before melting into the straw. The mingling of heat and cold shapes every corner of this space. You lift your hand and place it on the cow's side again. The warmth is deep, steady, reliable. You imagine sleeping just beyond these animals, hearing them breathe, leaning on their presence to soften the grip of winter. It must feel like resting beside living embers. The family does not waste this warmth. As night deepens, the father closes the byre doors, sealing the animals inside. You stand in the doorway for a moment, letting the mingled heat settle into your clothes. The sounds soften. The animals prepare for their long, slow sleep. The steady rhythm of their breathing makes the winter night feel gentler. You step back into the main room, carrying that borrowed warmth with you. Behind you, the animals settle again, their bodies turning the byre into a second hearth. Winter may still rage outside, but in here, wrapped in a mix of straw, breath, and quiet companionship, life continues with stubborn, comforting calm. You leave the animals behind and move back into the main room, only to find the father already tightening his boots and wrapping a thick cloak around his shoulders. The fire burns low now, steady but subdued, and the dim light flickers over his determined expression. You follow him outside, and the cold greets you with a bite sharp enough to stiffen your breath. Winter does not pause just because daylight fades early. Responsibilities keep moving, and so must you. Documents from the period emphasize that rural families worked year-round, even when frost hardened the soil and snow blanketed the fields. Survival did not allow a full season of rest. The ground crunches beneath your boots as you step into the open space behind the cottage. The horizon glows faintly with the last traces of daylight, a thin band of rose and silver stretched beneath a heavy grey sky. The father heads toward a small wooden shelter where tools are kept: axes, spades, mallets, a few metal-tipped implements darkened by use. Winter transforms these tools from helpers into lifelines. Without them, wood cannot be chopped, nets cannot be mended, and repairs cannot be made. You watch as he selects an axe, testing its weight in his hands. The blade catches a sliver of dying light, then disappears back into shadow. He walks toward a stump where logs wait to be split. The woodpile looks smaller than you would hope. Every household is constantly calculating. How many nights will this last? How many storms can it withstand? He places a log upright and brings the axe down with a clean, practiced swing. The crack splits the cold air, echoing across the frozen fields. You draw your cloak tighter. Even standing still feels like work in this temperature. Your breath curls upward in soft puffs as you watch him strike the next log. The rhythm is steady, almost meditative. Lift, swing, crack, exhale. The scent of fresh-cut wood creeps into the air, warm and sweet in contrast to the cold. A small observation from rural life enters your mind as you watch him work. Some communities believed that chopping wood at dusk brought good fortune because the falling night would swallow any ill spirits drawn to the sound. Whether or not anyone truly feared such spirits, the habit of working late into fading light was incredibly common. Winter did not grant long days, so every spare moment mattered. The mother steps outside next, carrying a basket filled with torn garments. Repairs do not stop in winter, and poor light cannot be an excuse. She will mend by firelight later, but now she uses the last natural brightness to inspect the cloth. Her fingers trace worn seams and thin spots. She sighs quietly, then returns indoors to prepare needles and thread. You wander farther into the yard, where a wooden fence surrounds a small patch of frozen earth. This was once a thriving garden in warmer months. Now it lies silent beneath a thin crust of frost. A row of old cabbage stalks leans crookedly, their leaves shriveled but still edible for the animals. The boy appears with a small basket, collecting whatever can be salvaged. The cold has made the cabbage tough, but the animals do not mind. Not all researchers agree on how much outdoor activity peasants undertook during the deep winter months. Some argue that work slowed significantly, while others believe that families continued laboring in short bursts throughout the day. As you watch the father chop wood, the mother sort garments, and the boy gather scraps from the frozen plot, you feel the truth leaning somewhere between. They cannot afford idleness, but winter restricts what the body can endure. You walk toward the barn where the older girl stands with a small wooden rake. She gathers dropped straw and heaps it into a corner. Clean bedding means healthier animals, and healthier animals mean milk, wool, and meat later in the season. She works quickly, her breath forming tiny clouds that seem to follow her movements. Inside the dim barn, you notice a pile of tools waiting for winter maintenance. A wooden rake missing teeth, a scythe with a dull blade, a wooden pitchfork with one tine snapped. Winter is the season for repairing these items. When the ground is too hard for farming and the days too short for long fieldwork, families mend everything they can. Tools must be ready when the thaw arrives. A small cart leans against the barn wall, its wheels rimed with frost. The father will remove the wheels, tighten the joints, and apply new grease made from animal fat. Without maintenance, the cart will seize when needed most. You can almost hear its future groan as he pulls it apart piece by piece. You continue along the fence line and notice a cluster of rabbit snares partially buried in snow. The father must check them regularly, even in winter. You crouch and examine one closely. The simple loop of twine and bent branch is rustic but effective. Winter snares supplement the diet, offering occasional fresh meat when the cellar stores grow monotonous. You rise, your fingers tingling from the cold despite your thick gloves. The wind changes direction, sweeping across the village with a low moan. You tilt your head and listen. Somewhere in the distance, someone else is chopping wood. Another family is carrying water from a frozen well. Another child is gathering kindling. The entire village becomes a quiet orchestra of winter labor. The mother calls the younger children to help gather small sticks scattered near the hedgerow. These sticks will be used as fire starters. They dart around eagerly, turning the task into a game. Their laughter carries a warmth of its own. Even winter has moments of play. The father pauses to stretch his arms. He wipes his brow, despite the cold, then looks at the diminishing woodpile. He shifts his weight, calculating again. You sense the invisible math running through his mind. The number of logs burned last week, the storms predicted by the sky's color, the number of trees still standing in the nearby woods that can safely be felled. You walk toward the outer edge of the yard, where the fence meets a line of skeletal trees. Their branches stretch upward like dark hands against the fading sky. Some of these trees will be cut soon. Others must remain for future seasons. Winter requires constant negotiation with nature, a pact of sorts. Behind you, the boy returns from the garden with his basket now half full. He hands it to his mother, who nods approvingly. She lifts a shriveled stalk, examines it, and sets it aside for the animals. Nothing is wasted. Even the most unappetizing scrap has value. The older girl joins the father now, gathering the split logs and stacking them neatly in a sheltered corner near the house. The two work in silent harmony. The logs thump softly as they are arranged in a tight, stable wall that will dry slowly over the coming weeks. A gust of wind pushes a flurry of snowflakes across the sky. You tilt your head upward. The flakes swirl in delicate spirals, dancing briefly before settling on the frozen ground. Snow brings beauty, but also burden. It hides tools, buries paths, and delays chores. The father studies the flakes with a cautious expression. He picks up his axe again. More wood must be chopped before the snowfall thickens. As night edges closer, lanterns glow in neighboring cottages. You hear muffled voices, the scraping of shovels, the thump of logs, the creak of doors. Work continues, not frantically, but steadily, like a heartbeat. You follow the family back toward the cottage. The mother ushers the children inside, rubbing their cold hands between her palms. The father lingers one last moment to secure the tools beneath the shelter. When he finally returns indoors, snowflakes cling to his cloak like tiny crystals. You step inside behind him, letting the warmth embrace you once more. Winter outside may demand constant effort, but indoors the air softens. You sit near the hearth again, listening to the echo of outdoor work fade from your ears. The quiet feels well earned. Work never truly stops, but for tonight, the family can rest, and you rest with them, ready to see what survival requires next. You settle by the hearth for only a brief moment before the father pulls out a small wooden box from under a bench, motioning for you to join him. Inside the box lies a scatter of simple tools and small winter gadgets, each one worn smooth from years of use. The sight immediately reminds you that surviving medieval winter is as much about clever adjustments as it is about strength. Chronicles from the time indicate that households relied on an assortment of minor tools and improvised devices, each one designed to turn an otherwise impossible winter task into something manageable. You lean closer, studying the contents with curiosity. The first object he lifts is a wooden-handled knife with a blade that has grown thin from constant sharpening. It is used for everything from cutting roots to slicing rope to loosening frozen clots of dirt stuck to boots. He hands it to you, allowing you to feel its weight. The handle is warm from his palm, shaped by decades of gripping hands. You run your thumb along its edge and sense that this tool has seen countless winters, each one carving a little more memory into its surface. Next, he reveals a bundle of coarse twine. At first glance, it seems mundane, but a closer look shows knots, loops, and tiny repairs along its length. A curious detail from peasant life pops into your mind. Families often braided plant fibers into emergency cords during winter, using twisted nettle, flax stems, or even strips of old linen cloth. These handmade ropes reinforced tools, secured bundles of firewood, patched fences, and even hung meat to dry. The twine in the father's hands is far more than a thread. It is adaptability made tangible. He pulls out a small bone awl, its tip shining faintly in the firelight. This tool is essential for repairing leather, poking holes in cloaks, and threading rough yarn through layers of cloth. You watch as the mother takes the awl in her fingers and presses it gently into a piece of leather that needs tightening. The motion is simple, almost graceful. Survival in winter depends on many such tiny gestures, each one building toward safety. You notice a cluster of small objects carved from wood, each with a different shape. Some are wedges, others are pegs. A few resemble miniature shovels. Not all experts agree on how frequently these homemade implements were used throughout Europe, but many believe that resourceful families crafted them during winter evenings to help with tasks around the home and barn. You pick up a small wooden wedge, feeling its rough texture. The father shows how it fits snugly between loose planks in the wall to tighten gaps and block drafts. Such small inventions make a remarkable difference when icy wind prowls outside. The girl approaches carrying a handful of reeds. She kneels beside the family's basket of mats and begins weaving the reeds together. This is an ongoing winter task, one that protects feet from cold floors. She works quickly, her fingers moving in a delicate pattern. The reeds rustle softly, creating a soothing rhythm that almost blends with the crackling fire. You watch the mat take shape, knowing it will insulate a bed, line a basket, or reinforce a wall seam before long. The father turns to show you a wooden mallet, its head scarred and cracked. It is used to drive pegs into frozen ground, flatten snow in front of the doorway, and tap loose boards back into place. You lift it, feeling the density of its wooden head. It is heavy but balanced. As you tilt it in your hand, you realize how often small tools like this stand between comfort and discomfort, between warmth and cold. Nearby, a wooden bucket sits by the door, its edges damp from melted frost. A flat iron rod leans against it. The rod is used to break ice in the water pail each morning. The father demonstrates by tapping the rod against the air, mimicking the sound of striking a frozen surface. The imaginary crack echoes through your mind. You can almost feel the shock of cold water splashing upward as ice gives way. You kneel beside the hearth once more and notice a long-handled hook resting near the fire. The mother uses it to adjust pots, pull burning logs into place, or lift hot stones from the embers. You touch the handle. The wood is warm and smooth, shaped to fit comfortably in a human hand. You imagine how dangerous tending a fire becomes without such a tool, especially when layered clothing restricts movement and stiff gloves dull the grip. As you observe these simple objects, the boy brings forward a basket filled with dried nettle stems. He explains shyly that the family twists these stems into makeshift scrub brushes and rough cord. You take one stem between your fingers and feel its brittle snap. Yet with patience and technique, even these fragile pieces can become something useful. That is winter ingenuity, transforming what seems worthless into something essential. The father stands and gestures for you to follow him outside again. As you step into the night air, the cold sweeps across your face, sharp enough to make your eyes water. He leads you toward a small wooden sled resting near the barn. It is little more than planks lashed together, but it glides over snow with ease. He explains, in his quiet, practical way, that this sled helps transport firewood, bundles of straw, buckets of water, and even small children through thick winter snow. Pulling the sled requires less energy than carrying heavy loads across icy ground. You grip the sled's rope and pull it a short distance. The motion feels smooth, steady. The sound of wood sliding over snow is soft and rhythmic. It becomes obvious how such a simple device saves time and strength every day. Not far from the sled lies a stack of rocks arranged deliberately along the side of the house. These stones retain heat when placed near the fire, then are carried to warm beds or thaw frozen boots. You pick one up. It is cold now, but its smooth surface promises comfort after a few hours beside the hearth. As you walk toward the fence, you notice an odd wooden frame leaning against the barn wall. It looks like a crude snowshoe made of woven branches. The father lifts it and holds it against your foot. Its purpose becomes clear instantly. Winter roads can vanish under snowfall, making walking treacherous. By distributing weight across a larger surface, these improvised snowshoes keep people from sinking into drifts. You slip one on and take a few steps. Your foot stays above the snow, wobbling slightly, but supported. The sensation feels both awkward and miraculous. Another tool catches your eye. A simple hand broom made from bundled twigs tied to a stick. It clears snow from doorways, shakes frost off clothing, or brushes ash from the hearth. Even the smallest tools have broad utility when winter stretches for months. A faint rustling draws your attention to the woods beyond the fence. The father points to a row of trees where he has tied small leather strips to mark which branches need trimming. These markers help him find firewood even when snow hides the ground and disguises the landscape. A clever reminder carved from something as simple as scrap leather. The moon climbs higher, illuminating the quiet tools scattered around the yard. Everything here carries a purpose. Every object is a partner in survival. Winter may strip the world bare, but human hands refuse to stop shaping, fixing, and crafting. The mother calls softly from inside, and you follow the father back into the cottage. The warmth folds around you like a blanket. The tools return to their box, ready to be used again at dawn. You sit, reflecting on what you have seen. Winter survival is not only about food or fire, it is about the creativity etched into every small invention, every humble object shaped by necessity. You feel a deep respect for these simple tools, each one shining with quiet determination. The night grows deeper, the fire softens, and you prepare for the next part of your journey through this frosty world. You remain by the hearth for a few breaths, letting the warmth settle into your bones, but the calm does not last long. A quiet cough breaks the stillness, coming from the far side of the room, where the youngest child lies wrapped in a wool blanket. The mother moves toward the child instinctively, placing a gentle hand on their forehead. Her expression tightens, not with panic, but with that familiar winter worry every medieval family carries deep in their hearts. Illness is never a small thing in this season. It is widely acknowledged through parish records and household notes that winter was the most dangerous time for sickness, when cold air, cramped living, and thin diets made bodies vulnerable. You kneel beside the child, watching their tired eyes blink open, glazed with discomfort. The cottage feels warm to you, but for someone already weakened, even this warmth is fragile. The fire provides heat, but it also fills the room with dry smoke that irritates lungs already struggling. You sense the delicate balance this family must maintain. Enough heat to survive the night, but not enough smoke to provoke more coughing. The mother fetches a small clay jar from a shelf. She opens it and reveals a mush of honey blended with mashed herbs, a practiced remedy. Honey smooths the throat, and herbs like thyme or hyssop bring what small relief they can. She offers a spoonful to the child, who swallows slowly. You watch the tension in the mother's shoulders ease slightly when the coughing quiets. A quiet, lesser-known detail from rural life floats into your awareness as you see her prepare another jar. Many families mixed animal fat with crushed garlic to create a salve rubbed onto chests and backs. The scent was strong and lingered for days, but parents swore it eased breathing and soothed fevers. The mother now rubs a similar salve along the child's ribs, working in slow circles while humming a low, steady melody that seems older than the walls. The father steps outside briefly, returning with a handful of snow. He places it in a bowl so the mother can dab a cloth into the meltwater and pat the child's forehead. This cycle of warmth and coolness is a well-practiced art. They do not have medical certainty. They have instinct, repetition, and inherited rituals. Not all researchers view these remedies in the same light. Some argue that such treatments offered little more than comfort, while others believe that certain herbs genuinely relieved symptoms or even prevented complications. As you watch the mother work with careful, gentle hands, you sense that in this world, comfort itself is a form of healing, and sometimes that is enough. The fire crackles, sending thin wisps of smoke upward, and you begin to notice how the haze builds in the corners of the room. Medieval cottages often lacked chimneys, relying instead on smoke drifting slowly through thatch or small openings in the walls. On healthy days, the family barely notices the haze, but when illness strikes, the smoke becomes an enemy. The father moves to open the wooden shutter a crack, letting in a thin rope of freezing air. The draft spirals through the room, quickly cooling it. The mother frowns, torn between battling the smoke and protecting the warmth. Every decision in winter demands trade-offs. The older girl brings forward a bundle of dried mint leaves tied with thread. She drops them into a small pot of water and sets it near the hearth. As the water warms, a fragrant steam begins to drift upward. It sharpens the air, clearing the throat slightly. You breathe it in and feel its cooling freshness settle like kindness inside your lungs. The boy, watching quietly, approaches with a small wooden cup filled with weak ale. Even children drank diluted ale because water could be unpredictable, especially in winter when wells froze or became contaminated. He hands it to the mother, who offers the child a sip to keep their throat moist. You see gratitude flicker across her tired face. The father moves quietly around the room, stuffing cloth into the edges of the shutter to control the draft. He pauses near the child, placing a heavy wool cloak at the foot of the bed. The family will use the cloak later to trap heat across the child's legs. Winter illness requires layers, both literal and emotional. As you move to the other side of the room, you notice a small bundle hanging from the rafters, dried flowers tied with colored thread, a protective charm. Some families believed that hanging certain plants could keep illness from worsening or drive away lingering fever spirits. Whether or not anyone still believes fully in such spirits, the charm remains. It gives hope. Sometimes a symbol is as powerful as a remedy. The mother whispers to you that the child has been exposed to icy air earlier that day, perhaps while carrying water, perhaps while tending to animals. She does not scold. Winter forces everyone outside, even when danger lurks in every gust of wind. She smooths the child's hair, brushing away stray strands that cling to their damp forehead. You watch as she checks the child's hands and feet. Both are cold, though the rest of the body is warm. She rubs them briskly with a cloth warmed near the hearth. This technique, used across countless households, helps restore circulation and prevents chills from deepening the illness. Her movements are firm but tender. The older girl takes a seat beside her sibling, offering her presence quietly. She hums a familiar lullaby, and her voice twines with the crackling fire. The melody softens the atmosphere around the child, creating a cocoon of sound and warmth. Outside, a distant dog barks, and the wind shivers through the thatched roof. Inside, the family becomes a shield. Illness in winter is not confronted with panic, but with steady, patient actions repeated countless times through generations. You glance at the bowl of herbs. Some are common, easily grown and stored. Others are rarer, gathered from forest edges or purchased at market when luck allowed. The family uses what they have, and what they have must be enough. A pot of broth sits near the fire now, warming slowly. Bone broth, thin but nourishing. The mother ladles a small amount into a wooden cup and cools it with a few drops of snow melt. She lifts the cup to the child's lips. The child sips weakly but steadily. The warmth works its way inward, offering comfort from the inside out. You step back a little, giving the family space. The firelight washes gently across the room. The harsh edges of winter soften for a moment. The child's cough grows quieter. The mother's shoulders relax another fraction. This is how illness is faced in the coldest months. Not with medicine as you know it today, but with blankets, herbs, warmth, patience, and faith in rituals passed down from ancestors. Every winter tests the body, but it also reveals the deep tenderness woven into daily survival. As the child drifts into a light sleep, the family settles in close. The mother wraps the blanket more tightly. The father adjusts the fire. The siblings curl nearby, forming a warm circle around the resting child. Winter may be harsh, but inside this cottage, care becomes its own kind of fire. You stay close to the fading warmth of the fire for another moment, but soon the father reaches for his cloak again, this time not to work outside, but to prepare for a different kind of winter ritual. He nods toward you gently, inviting you to follow. The air inside the cottage feels thick with the quiet rhythms of illness, work, and worry. But beyond these walls lies another source of comfort that medieval families leaned on through the darkest stretches of winter. Surviving the cold was never only a physical struggle. Faith held its own kind of heat. Written accounts from the period show that regular trips to the village church offered emotional grounding, a sense of unity, and a place to speak fears aloud when winter pressed too heavily on the heart. You step outside with him, the cold slicing into your cheeks like fine needles. Snow crunches beneath your boots as you follow the narrow path leading between frozen hedges. The village is hushed, wrapped in that peculiar evening quiet that winter seems to press onto every surface. Smoke rises from chimneys in thin, wavering ribbons. Windows glow faintly, and voices drift out only in muffled traces. Ahead of you, the village church rises modestly from the landscape. Its stones are uneven, its wooden door weathered, but something about it feels steady, rooted in time, in a way that helps people breathe easier. As you approach, the soft rumble of chanting drifts through the cracks around the door. The sound blends with the wind, creating a harmony both eerie and comforting. You enter softly. The door creaks on its hinges, and a gust of cold air follows you inside. The church is dim, lit by a handful of beeswax candles flickering along the altar. Their golden glow dances across rough wooden pews and stone walls. The scent of melted wax and cold stone blends with traces of incense from an earlier mass. The quiet inside seems deeper than the quiet outside, shaped by centuries of whispered prayers. A small gathering of villagers kneels near the front, wrapped in cloaks still dusted with snow. They murmur together, not quite singing, not quite speaking. Their voices weave through the air like threads of soft wool. You notice the tension in their shoulders easing as they pray, as if the warmth here is not from fire, but from shared belief. A lesser-known detail emerges as you glance toward the back of the church. Hanging from a wooden beam is a cluster of dried rush crosses, woven during last spring's festival. Families carried them home each year, placing them above doors or hearths as protection through winter. The remains of last year's charms still linger, tucked behind beams or resting on window ledges. You touch one gently. Its texture is rough, but its presence undeniably comforting. The priest steps forward from a shadowed corner. He is older, his beard streaked with grey, his cloak thick and patched like everyone else's. Despite the chill, his expression radiates warmth. He greets each villager quietly, offering a hand on a shoulder or a blessing whispered directly into an ear. In a world where doctors are scarce and winters are long, this simple reassurance means more than you might imagine. You take a seat near the back of the church, watching the candlelight flicker across the stones. The father of the household kneels beside you. His breath forms gentle clouds in the cold interior. He folds his hands, closes his eyes, and whispers a prayer you cannot fully hear. But you can feel its weight, its sincerity. He prays for his family, for the sick child, for good weather, for surviving another harsh season. There is ongoing discussion among medieval historians about how deeply faith shaped daily life in winter. Some argue that religious practice intensified during the cold months, providing structure when the world outside felt unpredictable. Others suggest that peasants held a more fluid, practical relationship with faith, blending Christian ritual with older local customs. Here, sitting in this chilly sanctuary, you sense a blend of both, devotion tied with pragmatism, ritual mixed with survival instinct. The priest lights another candle and sets it before a small wooden carving of a saint whose features have been softened by centuries of hope and fingertips. Villagers step forward to touch the carving, pressing their palms to the wood. Their breath is shaky at times, laden with unspoken fears. They leave small offerings, a few dried herbs, a braided cord, a carved token. None hold monetary value, but each is a piece of effort and heart. A mother from another household enters, cradling a toddler wrapped tightly in wool. She whispers something to the priest, who nods and traces a blessing across the child's forehead. The child's eyes are heavy with sleep, but their small hand curls trustingly around the mother's cloak. The warmth of the moment softens the edges of the cold stone room. The older girl from your household group arrives a bit later, having stayed behind to watch her younger sibling. She carries a tiny pouch with her, filled with dried lavender. She places it at the foot of a candle stand. Lavender symbolizes calm, purity, hope. Maybe she offers it on behalf of her sick brother or sister. Maybe for herself. Maybe for the season ahead. The tone of the space shifts as more villagers file in. Some enter alone, their shoulders stooped from long days in the cold. Others come with families, bundled together like small migrating flocks. The priest begins a simple chant, and the congregation answers in low, steady voices. The sound fills the room in gentle waves, warming it from within. Your attention drifts upward to the rafters. Between the beams, small deposits of snow cling where the roof has let in tiny flakes. The wind moans outside, slipping through gaps in the wood, but even that sound feels softer here, tamed by the steady rhythm of human voices. A young boy lights a candle near the entrance, his hands shaking slightly. He lifts the flame to a wick, watching it catch and bloom into a small, steady glow. His face softens in the golden light. It is one small flame among many, but its warmth is undeniable. You listen as the priest speaks quietly. His voice is soft, but carries clarity. He talks about endurance, about the promise of spring hidden beneath the snow, about the strength of community, and the resilience of souls that gather through the darkest months. His words are not poetic, but they are steady. They settle into the room like gentle embers. People begin to rise, offering each other nods and murmurs of goodwill. Some share small pieces of news, some check on neighbors' health, some simply smile. In this world, kindness is a kind of currency, and winter is when it is spent most freely. As the villagers drift out into the night, you follow the father back into the cold. The wind wraps around you again, but it feels different now, lighter somehow, less threatening. Behind you, the church stands like a lantern in the snow, its candles flickering through the cracks in the door. Inside, the last traces of chanting fade into silence, leaving behind a warmth made not by fire, but by hope carried from heart to heart. You walk home with the family, feeling that quiet, steady glow travel with you through the winter dark. You return with the father through the snowy path leading back toward the cottage, and by the time you reach the doorway, you can already hear faint voices inside, not tense or urgent, but warm, layered, familiar. The sound of neighbors visiting on a winter evening. When he pushes open the door, a wave of heat escapes and wraps around you, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and simmering broth. Winter may isolate households physically, but socially, it can draw them together like bees clustering around a shared hive of warmth. Surviving the cold is easier when hands, hearts, and stories gather in the same room. Contemporary village accounts reveal that neighborly visits during the cold months were not mere social niceties, but essential threads of communal resilience. You step inside and find two neighbors already settled near the hearth. One is an older woman, wrapped in a heavy shawl patched with dozens of small squares. The other is a broad-shouldered man whose boots are still dusted with snow. The mother greets them with a tired but genuine smile, her voice soft with relief. You sense instantly how these visits lift the weight of winter off the family's shoulders. The younger children sit close to the visitors, eyes bright, eager for company. The sick child lies still in bed but seems calmer, soothed by the gentle hum of voices and the presence of familiar figures. The older girl pours cups of weak ale for the guests, her hands steady, her gaze polite. The older woman reaches into her shawl and pulls out a small bundle tied with string. Inside lies a handful of dried juniper berries and a pinch of crushed mint, offered as a small healing gesture for the ill child. A kind, simple gift, but meaningful in every way. In many rural communities, sharing herbs and remedies was a sign of solidarity. It was common for women to trade knowledge quietly, slipping remedies to one another during dark months when illness prowled. A curious bit of local custom crosses your mind as you watch her set the herbs beside the hearth. Some villages believed that sharing medicinal plants forged a protective bond between households, strengthening the entire community against winter misfortune. Whether or not such beliefs held power beyond comfort, the rituals persisted across centuries. The broad-shouldered man leans closer to the fire, rubbing his hands briskly. His fingers are swollen slightly from the cold, but he smiles widely when the father offers him a seat. They exchange quiet greetings before launching into a discussion about the weather, the condition of the nearby stream, the state of the paths leading to the woods. Their voices weave together like threads of practical wisdom. Not all researchers interpret these winter gatherings in the same way. Some argue they were occasions to share labor, food, and news. Others emphasize the emotional support they provided, especially during years when hunger pressed close. As you listen now, you sense both sides of the argument. These gatherings carry warmth, laughter, plans, and strategy. They lift spirits and ensure survival. The mother offers each visitor a small bowl of porridge from the pot by the fire. It is simple food, but she shares it without hesitation. Generosity in winter becomes its own form of currency. The visitors accept the bowls gratefully, murmuring blessings for the household. You watch the steam rise from their spoons, catching the light like drifting silk. One of the children sits beside the older woman and begins telling her about a rabbit he spotted near the hedgerow earlier in the day. His voice is soft but excited. The older woman listens with patient interest, nodding, smiling, and asking small questions. You see the boy's posture relax, his worries melting into the gentle rhythm of human connection. The broad-shouldered man, warming steadily, begins to share a story from his youth, describing a winter so cold that the village well froze all the way to the bottom. The children gasp, leaning closer, their eyes wide with disbelief. He chuckles at their reactions, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. His tale continues, filled with mishaps, near disasters, and strokes of luck that carried his family through that legendary winter. As he speaks, the firelight dances across the room, illuminating the nodding heads of neighbors who have weathered countless winters themselves. Their laughter slips out softly, their breaths rising in warm currents that push against the cold pressing at the windows. You glance toward the shutters. Frost gathers on them like delicate lace. Outside, the world is rigid and silent, but inside, conversation bubbles gently, softening the sharp edges of the night. A soft knock interrupts the warmth. Another neighbor enters quietly, holding a small wooden box. Inside are a few scraps of beeswax, saved from candle remnants. The family can melt them later to shape a new candle. This is the sort of gift that cannot be underestimated. Light is priceless in winter, especially during the longest nights. He sets the box on the table and steps back, motioning that he cannot stay long. Still, his brief visit leaves the room warmer in spirit. He checks on the sick child, asks after the family's well-being, then returns to the freezing darkness outside. The door closes behind him, and the cottage exhales, gathering the warmth back to its center. Conversation resumes easily. The older woman comments on the herb bundles hanging from the rafters, complimenting the mother's skill. The mother blushes lightly and explains which herbs came from her garden and which were traded at the last market. They exchange small hints for better drying techniques, their voices low, confidential, almost conspiratorial. Knowledge passes between them like bread shared by a fire. Meanwhile, the father and the broad-shouldered man discuss the thinning supply of wood in the forest nearest the village. They talk strategy. Which direction is safest to travel tomorrow? Which fallen trees are still accessible? Which areas have paths packed by last week's travelers? Listening to them, you grasp how deeply survival depends on collaboration. Winter does not favor the solitary. A faint laugh escapes the children as the older girl gently teases her brother about his rabbit story. The boy hides his face in embarrassment, but his eyes gleam with delight. Even teasing becomes a form of warmth. The sick child stirs slightly, waking just long enough to hear the murmured chatter. Their eyes flutter open. The older woman leans close and whispers a blessing into their ear. The child's breathing steadies, their brow relaxing as they drift back into rest. Human closeness does what medicine cannot. You take in the room slowly, letting the atmosphere settle into your senses. Every face here glows with the same flickering firelight. Every expression reflects the same, quiet, stubborn strength. These neighbors are not gathered by chance. They are drawn together by winter's pressure, bound by the understanding that shared warmth is the only antidote to shared hardship. The fire crackles, sending gentle sparks upward. The older man finishes his story, and the room falls into an easy silence. It is not awkward, it is peaceful, the kind of silence forged from familiarity and mutual trust. The mother begins clearing the bowls, but the older woman stops her with a soft gesture, taking the bowls herself. It is a small act of help, but the mother's smile shows how meaningful it is. Winter chores never stop, and one less task means precious rest. Eventually, the visitors begin preparing to leave. Cloaks are pulled tight, boots are stamped against the floor, farewells are exchanged, not rushed, but lingering with gentle sincerity. Blessings are murmured again, for health, warmth, and fortune. Once the door closes behind them, the cottage grows quieter. The family remains gathered near the hearth, carrying the lingering glow of companionship. You sit with them, aware that winter's cold grip feels looser now, its edges softened by shared stories, shared remedies, and shared hopes. Tonight, warmth does not come only from fire, it comes from community. You remain seated near the hearth for a few minutes after the neighbors depart, listening to the soft crackle of the fire as it settles into a steady burn. The cottage feels calmer now, as if the visit left a lingering warmth that even the flames cannot fully claim credit for. But soon the mother gestures gently toward the sleeping area, encouraging everyone to prepare for the long winter night ahead. Nights in this season stretch farther than your modern sense of time can easily grasp. They unfold slowly, filled with sounds that shape the experience of medieval winter life just as powerfully as cold or hunger ever could. Accounts from travelers and monastic observers often mention how deeply people listened at night, attuned to every creak, sigh, and distant murmur. The family moves around the room quietly, dousing their candles one by one until only the hearth remains, glowing in soft layers of ember red and flame gold. You watch as the father adjusts the fire with deliberate care, settling two thick logs at an angle so they will smolder through the night instead of roaring too brightly. Too much flame will burn wood too quickly, too little, and the cold will seep into bones before morning. He tests the position of the logs, nods once, and lets the fire settle. The children snuggle into their blankets, each one cocooned in layers of linen and wool. As they settle, the room seems to inhale slowly, drawing itself into a softer, quieter shape. You take your place nearby, letting your body sink into the bedding. The straw beneath you rustles, exhaling a grassy scent preserved from warmer months. The blanket above you holds the faint smell of smoke and lanolin. For a few minutes, the only sound is the shifting of bedding and the tiny hum of the cat as it circles at the foot of the children's pallet. But then, the first night sound arrives. A wooden beam overhead groans softly, adjusting to the changing temperatures. The sound is long and low, like the sigh of an old creature settling in for sleep. You pause, listening, not startled, just attentive. In a house made from living materials, these voices of wood and thatch are as familiar as family members. A faint scraping follows next. Something small moves within the walls, paws skittering lightly across the daub. A mouse, perhaps, searching for scraps or warmth. The cat's ears twitch instantly. It lifts its head, eyes glowing in the firelight, but the sound fades before it decides whether to act. In winter, rodents grow bold, but their presence is tolerated so long as they do not threaten food stores. Your ears remain alert, waiting for another tiny rustle. You shift slightly beneath your blanket as another sound emerges, different this time. A gentle, rhythmic thump from the byre where the animals rest. The cow shifts in her sleep, brushing her flank against the wooden partition. Her movement echoes through the quiet cottage like a heartbeat, grounding, steady. You feel the warmth of her body even from here, a reminder that these animals lend more than milk and wool. They lend presence, a kind of living company that shapes the night. A curious observation from some old rural diaries surfaces in your mind. Villagers often described winter nights as crowded with sounds, not empty. The world outside might sleep under snow, but inside, houses hummed with the subtle life of humans and animals breathing, wood settling, and wind testing every seam. The wind arrives next, touching the cottage like invisible fingers. It pushes softly at the shutters, humming low before rising into a gentle whistle. The sound shifts across the walls, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft. You watch the flame respond, leaning one way, then the other, as the draft snakes through unseen gaps in the structure. The father has stuffed cloth into most of the cracks, but the winter wind is persistent. It always finds a way to whisper into the room. For a moment, the wind dies completely, leaving a deep, fragile silence. You can hear your own breath mixing with the slow exhalations of the sleeping children. The fire pops quietly, sending a tiny spark upward that fizzles before reaching the roof. You feel your senses heighten in the quiet, as though the absence of sound demands more attention than noise ever could. Then comes a new sound, the sort that makes you pause in uncertainty. A faint groan from outside, far across the frozen yard. At first, you assume it is another tree bending under the cold, but the tone is different, too rhythmic. You lift your head slightly, and the father opens his eyes, listening too. After a breath, he relaxes. It is only the ice shifting on the nearby stream. In winter nights, even water speaks. Not all specialists interpret these nighttime soundscapes the same way. Some argue that medieval people, accustomed to such noises, barely noticed them. Others claim that winter nights heightened awareness, making families especially sensitive to every creak and whisper. As you lie in the dim glow of the fire, you suspect the latter. This world encourages attentiveness. It rewards it. The mother, still awake, rises to check on the sick child. She lifts the blanket slightly, ensuring the child's breath flows warm and steady. This movement creates a soft rustle, a tender noise in the quiet tapestry of night sounds. She settles back onto her own bedding with a long exhale, the kind that signals exhaustion wrapped in relief. You close your eyes briefly, drifting half into sleep, when a sudden tapping breaks the calm. A branch brushes against the outer wall, dragged by the wind. It taps once, twice, irregularly, like knuckles on a door. The sound is not frightening, just unexpected. The father sighs quietly. He will likely trim that branch tomorrow if the weather allows. Such small disruptions matter in winter. Sleep is precious. Another sound rises, this one more constant. The low, deep rumble of the pig shifting in the byre, snorting softly, then settling again with a huff. The familiar noise draws a quiet smile from the older child, who murmurs something dreamy before drifting deeper into sleep. Even animals have nighttime personalities here, full of quirks and comforts. Above you, the thatched roof responds to the cold. You hear faint cracking, like tiny grains splitting. The roof is losing moisture to the freezing air, tightening itself. The sound is subtle but continuous, a hushed winter music, older than any human tradition. Then the most delicate noise of all emerges: snow falling. At first, you doubt your ears, but soon you recognize it, a faint pattering along the roof, like sifted flour landing softly on wood. Each flake adds to the growing blanket that muffles the world outside. The snow creates its own hush, deepening the quiet, swallowing distant noises. The cottage becomes small, enclosed, almost floating within the sound-dampened winter night. A dog barks far away, sharp and brief. The sound travels strangely, muted by snow. Perhaps a fox is prowling near the edge of the forest. The bark repeats once, then fades. Silence returns like a slow tide. Gradually, the room settles into an almost dreamlike stillness. The fire whispers low. The cat purrs faintly. A child sighs softly in sleep. You listen to it all, aware that these sounds form the soundtrack of countless medieval winters. Each noise carries meaning, comfort, warning, memory, life. As you breathe deeply, soothed by the layers of sound, the darkness feels less intimidating. The night becomes a living companion, rather than an empty void. You find yourself sinking into sleep, lulled by the harmony of creaks, breaths, crackles, and whispers. Winter nights hold their own kind of beauty, shaped not by light, but by sound. And tonight, wrapped in warmth and surrounded by these gentle noises, you let your eyes close fully, ready for the next chapter of winter life when morning comes. You wake slowly the next morning, not to sunlight, but to the muted grey that seeps through the shutter cracks. The fire has burned down to embers, glowing faintly like sleepy eyes watching over the room. The cold has slipped back into the air, creeping across the floorboards and whispering along the edges of blankets. You shift slightly and hear the soft rustle of straw beneath you. In the half-light, you notice movement near the hearth. Two small shapes, children. Already awake, already working. Their breath forms faint puffs in the chilly dawn as they move with the quiet determination learned from generations before them. It is widely noted in manor records that children in medieval villages contributed significantly to winter tasks, even at very young ages. The youngest boy tugs on his woolen stockings, pulling them up with practiced motions despite the stiffness of the fabric. His fingers fumble once or twice, still clumsy with sleep, but he keeps going. Next to him, his older sister ties a scarf around her neck, the ends frayed from years of use. She smooths the wool with the flat of her hand, then moves toward a small basket filled with tools and scraps of cloth. Even before breakfast, she plans repairs that must be done today. You watch them quietly. Their faces are solemn in the cold, but underneath you see sparks of energy, the kind only children can hold on to in the bleakest season. The older girl kneels beside the hearth and gently stirs the embers with a long stick. She blows softly, coaxing a shy flame to rise. It flickers once, twice, then blooms into a small, steady fire. She sits back, satisfied. Keeping the fire alive is part of her morning duty. If it dies completely, the whole family pays the price in freezing hours and wasted fuel. A small, endearing detail from rural childhood comes to mind as you watch her tend the fire. Some families taught children to warm their hands near the embers and then run outside to fetch kindling before the warmth faded from their fingers. A small race against the cold. Today, however, the siblings seem content to take their time. The boy stands and stretches, rubbing at his eyes. He looks around the room, then moves toward the water jug. When he lifts it, a faint layer of ice cracks inside. He shakes it gently, hearing the water slosh. The ice will melt near the fire soon enough, but he knows better than to spill precious drops. He sets it near the hearth with exaggerated care, as though the jug might shatter if he breathes too hard. Not all experts agree on how much responsibility rested on children during winter months. Some scholars believe their chores were lightened during the harshest cold, while others argue that winter intensified their workload because the family needed every pair of hands. Here, watching these two move through their tasks with routine confidence, it is hard to imagine winter granting anyone an easy day. The girl crosses the room and lifts a small wooden stool. She carries it to the center of the floor and climbs on top to reach a rope of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. With nimble fingers, she plucks one sprig of marjoram and hands it to her brother. He grins, stuffing it carefully into a tiny cloth pouch he wears at his belt. A protective charm, perhaps, or a scent to mask the barn odors he will encounter later. You notice that while the tasks are serious, the children's movements contain a lightness that contrasts with the heavy responsibilities the adults carry. Childhood weaves through winter life, not in the absence of labor, but in the way simple tasks become opportunities for tiny joys. The girl moves to a wooden chest and pulls out a bundle of yarn. She sits cross-legged near the fire and begins winding it around her fingers, creating a neat ball. Her rhythm is steady. She hums under her breath, a small melody that fills the otherwise silent room. The sound blends perfectly with the crackling fire. For a moment, the cottage feels warmer, simply because of her tune. Her brother kneels beside her and begins stitching a tear in his mitten. His stitches are crooked, sometimes too tight, sometimes too loose, but his concentration is fierce. He bites his lip each time the needle snags. When he finally finishes, he holds up the mitten proudly. The girl examines it, nods approvingly, and pats his shoulder. Encouragement takes the place of formal education here. Skills are learned through imitation, patience, and gentle correction. The sick child stirs in the bedding, murmuring softly. The girl rises at once and checks their forehead, just as she watched her mother do the previous night. The gesture is confident, surprisingly mature for someone her age. She adjusts the blanket, tucking it closer around the small body. The boy watches with wide eyes, absorbing every detail. He will repeat these same gestures someday. A faint scratching sound reaches your ears. The girl turns quickly, recognizing it instantly. She grabs a clay bowl from the shelf and sprinkles a few crumbs near the doorway, luring a small hen that has wandered into the cottage seeking warmth. The bird hops over, pecks at the crumbs, and makes a pleased little noise. The children giggle softly. It is a rare moment of play in a season defined by scarcity. The boy, now fully awake, tugs on his boots and heads for the back door. The girl reminds him to wrap his scarf twice around his neck. He complies, rolling his eyes yet grinning. He pulls the wooden latch, and a burst of icy air enters the room as he slips outside to check the buyer. His steps crunch across the snow. You follow him out, staying a few paces behind. The morning sky is pale, still half asleep. He opens the buyer door and is instantly met by the warm breath of animals inside. One of the cows moos softly in greeting. He answers with an affectionate pat on her flank, then checks the straw, turning it over with a small rake to freshen it. His movements are small, but purposeful. The goat nudges him playfully, nearly knocking him over. He laughs, steadying himself. A moment later, he scoops a little straw and tosses it lightly toward the pig. The pig snorts, confused, and the boy giggles again. Even in the coldest season, children find ways to turn chores into games. A second small detail from period accounts becomes clear as you watch him scatter feed for the hens. Children were often responsible for animal care throughout winter, especially for smaller creatures like chickens and goats. It gave them independence and taught them the rhythms of the farm long before adulthood. As he finishes his tasks, you notice his breath forming soft white clouds in the chilled air. He stands with his hands on his hips, surveying the animals with pride. The roles he plays here, caretaker, helper, guardian, build slowly, day after day. Winter shapes him as much as he shapes the tasks around him. Back inside, the older girl is sweeping the floor with a twig broom, pushing straw and dust into a neat pile. She moves quickly, knowing that warmth depends on keeping the floor clean and dry. The father enters a moment later, brushing snow from his cloak. He nods approvingly when he sees how much the children have already done. The girl beams quietly. The boy, now returning from the buyer, stomps his boots loudly, filling the cottage with a lively clatter. Their energy fills the room with a sense of resilience. Even winter seems to soften in their presence. They gather near the hearth for breakfast, their cheeks flushed with cold and accomplishment. The morning porridge is simpler than last night's meal, but they eat eagerly, discussing small details from their chores and whispering about the hen who tried to sneak into the house earlier. Watching them, you realize something important. Winter might be harsh, but in the hands of children, even the simplest chores pulse with a sense of life. Their resilience becomes a kind of warmth for the entire household. As the fire brightens and the day begins its slow climb, the children prepare for the next tasks that await them. Their laughter, soft but real, lingers in the air like a promise. You watch the children finish their morning tasks, but soon the rhythm of the cottage shifts again. The mother rises from her seat by the hearth, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her steps are calm but purposeful as she moves toward a wooden chest near the wall. When she lifts its lid, a soft, warm scent escapes, carrying traces of lanolin, dried herbs, old fabric, and something faintly sweet, like barley flour. From this moment onward, you begin to see the pulse of winter through her hands. It is widely recognized in household accounts and monastic letters that women's winter labor formed the hidden engine of survival, humming steadily beneath every day of freezing cold. She pulls out a spindle first, then several handfuls of raw wool. The fibers cling to one another like pale clouds. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she twists the wool around the spindle, coaxing it into a long, smooth thread. The movement is so fluid, so rhythmic, that you almost forget the complexity behind it. Thread becomes cloth, cloth becomes clothing, clothing becomes warmth, and warmth becomes life in the long winter. You sit nearby and watch the spindle whirl gently. The soft whir blends with the crackle of the fire. The mother's fingers never pause. She draws the wool into thinner and thinner strands, turning something unruly into something obedient. Without this work, no mending could happen. No blankets could be repaired. No new garments would appear when a sleeve tore or a sock frayed. The winter would grow colder, harsher, and more unforgiving. A small, intriguing detail about women's winter work rises naturally as you watch her. Some communities believed women who spun wool during thunderstorms risked attracting lightning, not because of magic, but because the sound of whirring spindles supposedly invited spirits of the storm. So, in winter storms, many kept their spindles near the hearth, spinning in whispered silence to avoid tempting fate. It is hard to know how often this belief was taken seriously, but stories of spinning and storms linger in the margins of old folk tales. The girl, already finished sweeping, joins her mother. She settles onto a stool with needle and thread in hand, mending a tear in the family's heavy cloak. Her stitches run straighter than yesterday's, more even, more confident. The mother glances at her work, smiles softly, and continues spinning. This room becomes, for a time, a workshop of quiet skill. Not all researchers agree on just how much of winter labor fell to women alone. Some suggest that roles blurred depending on need, while others argue that spinning, mending, brewing, and managing the home were overwhelmingly women's responsibilities. Sitting here, watching the mother's relentless focus and the girl's eager imitation, you sense why the debate exists. Tasks shift, overlap, and blend, shaped by necessity rather than rule. A pot near the hearth begins to bubble. Earlier, the mother mixed water with crushed barley and a small spoonful of dried hops. Now the mixture simmers, filling the cottage with a malty aroma. She stands to stir it, keeping her movements slow and careful. This small batch of ale will be mild, barely alcoholic, but it keeps illnesses at bay and warms belly and spirit alike. She pours a thin line of the hot liquid into a cup to test its flavor. Steam curls upward, carrying scents of grain and hearth smoke. Satisfied, she lets the pot simmer. Later she will strain it, cool it, and store it in a clay jug covered with waxed cloth. Beside the fire, she begins kneading a ball of dough next. Her hands press into it firmly, rhythmically, as if releasing tension into the soft mass. Flour is precious in winter, but every few days she bakes a small loaf or two, mixing grains with scraps of cooked peas or dried herbs. The aroma of baking bread will warm the cottage almost as much as the fire does. The girl rises to help, dusting her hands with a pinch of flour. Together, they shape the dough with practiced grace. The boy hovers nearby, watching, perhaps hoping for a warm crust later. The mother taps his nose lightly with a flour-covered finger, and he laughs, his breath puffing in the cold air. Even winter chores hold space for gentle play. Once the dough is set aside to rise, the mother returns to her chest and lifts out bundles of dried plant stems tied with string. She spreads them on the table and begins sorting. Mint for teas, wormwood for sickness, nettle for broth. Every plant has its season and purpose. She arranges them with care, her gestures quiet and precise. In a nearby shelf, she keeps small clay pots filled with salves. She opens one and begins mixing in a bit of warmed fat to soften its texture. The smell is earthy, herbal, and strangely comforting. This salve will soothe cracked skin, prevent frostbite, and calm coughs. She stirs it with deliberate ease, occasionally testing the consistency with her fingertip. You move a little closer, drawn by the warmth of her work. The girl joins you, pointing proudly at one pot she made herself last month. It is filled with beeswax and a bit of honey, perfect for healing small cuts and burns. Her eyes shine with accomplishment. Even in winter, learning continues. A faint scraping outside draws the mother's attention. She checks the shutter, confirming it is secure. Winter winds can pry their way into even the smallest cracks. Once satisfied, she returns to her work table. She takes out strips of cloth from a basket next. Some are old garments cut into usable pieces. Others are lengths of linen saved expressly for emergencies. She snips a few pieces and begins sewing them into small pouches. These will hold herbs for sickness or scented leaves for masking odors. The girl helps by tying tiny strings around the finished bundles. You notice now how every movement contributes to the family's survival. Women's work in winter does not shout, it whispers. It is steady, rhythmic, persistent, like the heartbeat of the home, and without it, the home cannot endure. The mother pauses only once, gazing toward the sick child. She rises to check the child's temperature again, brushing back a strand of hair with tender precision. The girl watches closely, absorbing the gesture. She will carry it into adulthood, repeating it for her own family someday. The mother returns to her tasks, this time pulling out a worn cloak. It needs reinforcement along the seams. She threads a sturdy needle and begins working the thick cloth with slow, powerful stitches. Her fingers, though roughened by years of labor, move with a softness that tells of long familiarity with fabric. The fire crackles gently, warming her hands between stitches. The glow lights her face, illuminating the concentration in her eyes. These winter hours, spent mending, brewing, spinning, and caring, are not simply tasks, they are offerings, acts of love given without fanfare. After a while, she reaches for a small iron hook and pulls the rising dough closer to the hearth. The loaf is beginning to swell, its surface smoother, its scent fuller. She smiles at the sight. Bread rising on a winter morning feels like a small victory. The girl places finished herb bundles in a clay bowl. The mother nods approvingly. The boy brings another armful of small sticks for kindling. The cottage fills with gentle motion, soft footsteps, the rustle of fabric, the sound of thread pulling through cloth. The day advances without rush, anchored by the steady work of the mother and her daughter. Their labor may not be loud or dramatic, but it is the foundation on which the family stands through winter's long grip. You watch them, deeply aware that in this quiet rhythm there is both strength and peace. You step away from the warm thrum of the household tasks and follow the father as he prepares for his own share of winter labor. He wraps a thick woolen cloak over his tunic, tightens the leather belt at his waist, and lifts a sturdy axe from its peg near the door. His movements are efficient, practiced through years of cold mornings just like this one. In winter, men's work stretches far beyond the fields. Though the soil now lies frozen and unyielding, the duties of maintaining the household, gathering fuel, protecting livestock, and braving the elements fall heavily on their shoulders. Manor rolls and agricultural records frequently note that winter was a season of secondary labor for men, not rest. He steps outside, and the cold greets him like an adversary. The air feels sharper today, with a metallic bite that touches your teeth when you inhale. Frost clings thickly to the wooden fence posts, turning them ghost pale in the faint morning light. The father surveys the yard with a concentrated gaze, counting silently the tasks that lie ahead. First, he heads toward the woodpile. The logs stacked there seem smaller than yesterday, either because the family burned more than expected last night, or because the growing cold has shrunk them in your imagination. The father picks up a piece, weighs it in his hand, and sets it aside. He knows exactly which wood burns fastest, which lasts the longest, and which produces too much smoke to be worth the trouble. He kneels beside a fallen tree limb that broke under the weight of recent snow. With a long-handled saw, he begins cutting it into usable segments. The saw teeth bite into the wood with a rough, scraping rhythm. The sound fills the quiet morning. Your breath forms slow plumes in the air as you watch him work. A fascinating practice noted in countryside traditions emerges in your thoughts as he moves around the woodpile. Men often checked the weight of logs by pressing them against their boots. If the wood felt too damp, they set it aside to dry indoors, near the hearth. This habit prevented excess smoke, which could sting the eyes, coat the walls, and irritate lungs already weakened by winter illnesses. As you observe the father shift from saw to axe, splitting the thicker logs with clean, powerful strikes, it becomes clear how deeply these skills are etched into him. Each swing seems perfectly measured, not too hard, not too soft. He knows the grain of every type of wood, understands how to read the cracks and pressure points, and adjusts his angle with instinctive precision. The crisp sound of splitting wood rings out across the frosted yard, promising warmth for another day. Behind you, the boy appears with a bundle of cord. He helps collect the newly cut logs, stacking them neatly against the wall. The father nods at him, occasionally offering a brief word of instruction. Their interaction is quiet but full of trust. Layer by layer, Winter teaches the boy how to one day shoulder these same tasks. Not all historians agree on how heavily winter burdens fell on men compared to other seasons. Some argue that without fieldwork, men experienced a lighter workload. Others point to evidence of relentless winter tasks, mending fences battered by storms, checking traps, clearing snow from pathways, hauling water when the well froze, cutting timber, repairing tools, and protecting livestock from predators. Watching the father now, you sense that winter offers no true respite. It simply shifts the shape of effort. The father wipes frost from his beard and gestures for you to follow him toward the edge of the property. Beyond the fence lies a stretch of woodland, its branches bowed beneath the weight of snow. The air grows colder under the trees, but the forest offers resources the family cannot survive without. He bends down to examine a snare he set yesterday. The trap lies empty, but the tracks around it tell a story. A fox passed through, brushing against the loop but not triggering it. He resets the snare, adjusting the tension carefully. Hunting in winter is unpredictable. Small animals provide vital protein, but they become wary and scarce as the season deepens. A small detail common in winter rural life comes to mind as you watch him adjust the trap. Some men rub their gloves with crushed juniper berries or pine resin to mask human scent. Whether it significantly helped is unclear, but the practice reveals how cleverly people attempted to outmatch the sharp senses of winter creatures. The father moves on to inspect the fence line. A post has cracked under last night's freeze, leaning just enough to worry him. He kneels, pressing his gloved hand into the snow to uncover the damage. With a practiced motion, he braces the post with wooden wedges from his cloak pouch and begins hammering them into place with a small mallet. The sound echoes in the crisp air. These repairs are small, but essential. A broken fence could invite predators or let livestock wander into danger. You follow him to the barn, where the animals greet him with soft grunts and shifting hooves. The warmth from their bodies brushes against your face as he checks their bedding. He adds fresh straw to the cow's stall, then tests the water bucket with his hand. A thin sheet of ice has formed. He breaks it with a sturdy iron rod, stirring until the water moves freely again. He kneels beside the goat, examining her hooves carefully. Sometimes ice builds between the hooves and must be removed to prevent injury. He scrapes away the debris gently, murmuring soothingly to the animal. The goat nudges him in quiet gratitude. You notice his breath quickening from effort. Winter work demands strength in slow, persistent doses. Nothing is rushed, but nothing can be ignored. Back outside, he takes a deep breath and steps toward the small stream near the woods. The surface is partially frozen, but the center still flows quietly. He fills a bucket, lifting it with a grunt. The water sloshes cold against the wooden sides. He carries it back toward the cottage, his steps steady despite the weight. On the way, he pauses at a fallen log half buried in snow. He presses his boot against it, testing its condition. Too wet to burn. He leaves it, knowing that wasted effort in winter has consequences. At the cottage door, he sets the bucket down with a heavy exhale. His beard is dusted with frost now, and the tips of his gloves have stiffened slightly. The mother opens the door and offers him a warm cloth for his hands. He presses it gratefully around his fingers, letting the heat soak in. The children gather around him eagerly, asking about the forest, the stream, the traps. He answers in short, patient phrases. Their curiosity warms the room more than the fire can. He sets the tools aside and rubs his shoulders, easing the strain of the morning. The day is far from over. More wood must be moved, more repairs made. And still, he will help with indoor tasks once the light fades. Perhaps the greatest truth about winter men's work, visible now in this quiet moment, is that endurance becomes a skill of its own. Not loud, not heroic, but steady, persistent, shaped by cold mornings, long days, and responsibilities that do not yield to weather. As the father finally sits near the hearth, steam rising from the cup the mother hands him, you feel the weight of his labor settle into the room. The warmth he helped secure fills every corner, an invisible shield against the season's worst. This is the rhythm of winter for men: lifting, mending, hauling, chopping, guarding, maintaining life through both strength and patience. And as you sit beside him, listening to the crackle of the fire, you sense that tomorrow will begin the same way, with breath in the cold air, an axe in hand, and a world of frozen tasks waiting to be shaped into survival. You remain close to the hearth as mid-afternoon drifts slowly into evening, the light thinning until the world outside feels dipped in blue-grey frost. The mother has just placed the rising loaf near the fire, and the children are settling into small tasks when a sudden knock echoes lightly on the door. Not urgent, not fearful, but expectant. The father rises, brushes wood dust from his sleeves, and opens the door to reveal a blast of cold air and two neighbors carrying baskets. At once, the atmosphere inside shifts. Tonight is no ordinary evening. It is a time for celebration, small though it may be. Throughout medieval villages, winter feasts, however modest, offered moments of joy and unity in a season otherwise marked by scarcity. Parish records, feast day mentions, and household accounts all hint at these cherished occasions. The neighbors step inside, stamping snow from their boots. One carries a basket wrapped in cloth, the scent of roasted grains wafting faintly from beneath it. The other brings preserved apples and a small clay jar sealed with wax. The mother's face brightens at the sight. These are rare gifts, and she greets the neighbors with warmth radiating through her tired expression. The children gather eagerly. A feast in winter does not require abundance. It requires intention, togetherness, and the promise of flavors too precious for everyday meals. The father helps the neighbors set their baskets on the table, and soon the mother unwraps the cloth, revealing a handful of roasted barley cakes, shaped in thin rounds and dusted with a pinch of crushed herbs. The scent fills the cottage instantly. A charming detail from village tradition surfaces as you watch the preparations unfold. Some families saved a small portion of their best ingredients, honey, dried fruits, herbs, for moments like this, believing that sharing good food in winter kept misfortune away and strengthened community ties. Even the humblest feast carried a sense of ritual. The mother moves toward the hearth, checking on the stew simmering there since morning. Today she added a few extra dried vegetables, a scrap of salted meat saved from the cellar, and a pinch of marjoram the girl harvested in late summer. Now she stirs the pot with a slow, practiced motion, letting the aromas rise and mingle. The mixture thickens, bubbling gently like distant laughter. The neighbors settle onto benches. One of them holds up a small clay jug. He explains that it contains a bit of mead, thin and mild but sweet enough to lift everyone's spirits. Mead is precious in winter, more precious than the children fully understand. The boy's eyes widen at the thought of even a tiny taste. Not all medieval feasts were tied to holidays. Some arose simply because the village needed cheer, or because a neighbor had recovered from illness, or because a difficult week deserved a warm ending. Scholars discuss this often, debating whether such gatherings were scheduled events or spontaneous acts of survival. Sitting here, surrounded by laughter and flickering firelight, you sense that spontaneity plays a larger role than any record reveals. The mother ladles stew into wooden bowls. Steam rises, catching the glow of the fire. The children receive their bowls with reverence, cupping them carefully with cold hands. The barley cakes are passed around next, followed by small slices of cheese and preserved apples. Even the sick child stirs at the aroma, lifting their head weakly as the mother brings them a softened piece of barley cake dipped in broth. You taste the stew. It is simple, but tonight it feels rich, savory, comforting. The blend of herbs and slow-cooked vegetables warms your chest from the inside out. Every swallow feels like a small victory against winter's chill. The girl offers one of her hand-woven mats as a place to set the mead jug, The neighbors compliment her work. She glows under the praise, though she tries to hide her smile by lowering her gaze. Compliments are rare treasures here, cherished and tucked quietly into the heart. The father raises his bowl slightly, not quite a toast, but close enough. His voice is soft as he expresses gratitude for the meal, for the visitors, and for the continuing health of the family, fragile though it feels. Everyone nods, smiling in agreement. A moment later, the neighbors begin sharing stories, the kind only told during winter gatherings, tales of past feasts, misadventures in the woods, near misses with angry geese, and the time a wandering peddler mistook a pig for a guard dog. The children erupt into laughter, their spirits soaring above the cold that grips the world outside. One neighbor tells a tale of a winter feast held years ago, when the snow piled higher than the door and villagers tunneled between houses to share food. The father nods at the memory. He was a young man then, and he remembers the tunnel roofs collapsing under heavy drifts. The storyteller admits he may have exaggerated the height of the snow, but no one challenges him. Winter tales grow taller with time. As the laughter settles, the girl rises to sprinkle a pinch of dried lavender into a small clay bowl near the hearth. She explains shyly that the scent helps calm nerves, especially during gatherings. The older neighbor chuckles, saying that lavender was once believed to keep mischievous spirits away during feasts. You sip your warm stew, imagining unseen sprites peeking curiously from the rafters. Winter invites such whimsical thinking. A soft, melodic humming begins as the mother starts tidying the table. Another neighbor joins her, and soon the humming becomes a quiet tune shared between them. You watch the rhythm of their hands, moving gracefully as they clear bowls and rearrange the small space. The tune softens the room like a wool blanket draped across weary shoulders. The sick child lies back, soothed by warm food and gentle noises. Their breathing steadies. The mother checks on them once more, brushing their hair aside before returning to the fire. The father pours a small amount of mead into wooden cups. Not much, just enough for a shared sip. The sweetness touches your tongue like a memory of summer, light and fleeting. The children toast with their cups of warm broth instead, tapping gently as if participating fully. Outside, wind pushes snow against the shutters, but the cottage does not yield. Tonight it is fortified by more than wood and daub. It is strengthened by warmth shared among friends, by stories, by laughter, by the breaking of bread. The neighbors linger a while longer. The boy shows them his carefully mended mitten. The girl proudly shares a few lines of a song she learned from her grandmother. The father and neighbor discuss which trees might fall next under the weight of snow. Every exchange weaves another thread of connection. Eventually, the neighbors rise, bundling themselves in layers before stepping back into the cold. Farewells are soft, but heartfelt. Promises are murmured, "We will visit again soon," and the door closes gently behind them. Silence returns, but it is a warm silence, glowing from within. The children sit close together, their cheeks flushed from food and excitement. The mother stirs the last of the stew, saving it for tomorrow's midday meal. The father rests his hands on the table, tired but content. A winter feast does not erase hardship, it does not shorten the long season, but it reminds the family of something essential. Winter does not win easily when people share warmth, stories, and small joys. Tonight, the hearth glows a little brighter, and so do the hearts gathered around it. The next morning arrives with a pale, watery light that barely touches the frost-covered roofs of the village. You step outside with the mother and father as they prepare for the weekly winter market day, one of the few chances for villagers to gather supplies, trade goods, and exchange news. Markets in winter might sound impractical, but early account books and merchant letters indicate that these chilly gatherings were essential for survival. They linked scattered households into a fragile network of goods and goodwill, even when snow made travel difficult. The air is sharp enough to sting your skin, and each breath feels like inhaling powdered ice. Snow crunches beneath your boots in deep, crisp layers. The father pulls a small hand sled behind him, its wooden runners gliding smoothly over the hard-packed path. The mother carries a woven basket, its handle wrapped with cloth to keep her fingers from freezing to it. Inside are the goods they plan to trade: a small bundle of herbs, a few skeins of newly spun wool, and a pair of mended gloves that the daughter crafted with great care. The boy trots beside them, bundled so tightly in wool and linen that he looks almost spherical. His eyes shine with excitement. Market days are not chores, they are adventures, even in winter. As you make your way along the narrow, snow-lined lane, more villagers join the path. Cloaks billow in the cold breeze. Boots slip slightly on icy patches. Dogs trot between feet, leaving quick, delicate prints in the snow. Despite the harshness of the season, there is an undercurrent of anticipation in every step. A small custom noted in many rural accounts drifts through your mind as you walk. Families often sprinkled crushed rosemary or juniper at the cottage threshold before leaving for market, believing it protected them during the journey. You spot faint green flecks near several doorways. Even in winter, old rituals remain alive. The path to the market widens as it approaches the village square, which sits slightly elevated to avoid flooding during thaw seasons. Today, it is covered with packed snow, polished smooth by dozens of boots. Wooden stalls stand like skeletal frames, their roofs thick with frost. Merchants have begun setting up tables, arranging their goods carefully to keep them from freezing. The mother greets a woman selling dried legumes. The two exchange a few words and compare their wares. The legumes are firm, pale, and clean. The mother inspects them with practiced eyes, testing their hardness with her fingernail. Satisfied, she offers a small skein of wool in trade. The merchant considers, then nods. The exchange is quick, but fair. You drift toward a stall filled with pottery. Clay bowls, jugs, and pots sit in rows, their surfaces etched with simple patterns. The potter stands behind the table, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He has brought sturdier wares today, ones less likely to crack in cold weather. The father examines a clay jug with a thick rim and nods approvingly. The price is too high for purchase, but the admiration is genuine. Not all historians agree on how vibrant winter markets truly were. Some argue that poor weather reduced attendance, while others point to evidence of lively trade, even in harsh seasons. Here, watching villagers form clusters around stalls, haggling, laughing, and sharing updates, you feel the winter market pulse with life. Children run about, chasing one another through the snow while their parents negotiate over grain or cloth. A group of older villagers huddle near a stall selling warm broth, cupping their bowls and inhaling steam as though drinking warmth itself. The scent drifts toward you: onions, cabbage, a hint of pepper. You feel it warm your nose before it reaches your stomach. A traveling peddler arrives, pulling a cart filled with small metal goods, knives, needles, hooks, buckles. His face is windburned, his boots battered. He sets up quietly, and villagers approach immediately. Needles break often in winter. Hooks and buckles go missing. Small tools are worth their weight in warmth. The mother inspects a set of metal buttons. Their shine is dulled by age, but they are sturdy. She offers dried herbs in exchange. The peddler eyes the herbs curiously before agreeing. Herbs are valuable during long cold months. He tucks them into a pouch with a grateful nod. Near the center of the square, a woman sells candles made from tallow and precious beeswax. Her stall glows with gentle light. The children stare, mesmerized by the golden flicker. The mother, understanding the need for caution, lets them admire but not touch. Candlelight is treasured in winter. Each wick represents hours of labor and careful storage. You step closer to a small group gathered near the well. They are sharing news. Stories flow like the thin winter sunlight. Someone mentions a wolf spotted near the northern woods. Another speaks of a distant village struggling with frozen wells. A man announces that a traveling monk passed through earlier in the week, offering blessings and advice on preserving food longer. Winter markets are not just for goods, they are arteries carrying information vital to survival. A curious observation mentioned in some old accounts becomes clear as you listen. Market gossip often shaped winter decisions: when to hunt, when to mend, when to conserve, when to share. Information could be as valuable as grain. The father pauses at a stall selling dried fish. He inspects a piece closely, checking for signs of spoilage. The fish is stiff, salted heavily, and still fragrant. The merchant offers a modest trade. After a moment of thought, the father exchanges a bundle of small wooden dowels he carved earlier in the season. The trade completes smoothly. Dried fish will add variety to the family's steady but predictable winter diet. The boy tugs at your sleeve and points to a stall selling carved toys. Tiny wooden animals line the table, their shapes simple but charming. The boy stares longingly, but he knows toys are a rare indulgence in winter. The carver notices his gaze and quietly hands him a small wooden bird. A gift, a kindness. The boy beams, clutching the bird as if it were carved from gold. Nearby, The girl approaches a stall offering colored thread. Her eyes widen at the bright hues: deep blue, rusty red, moss green. The merchant smiles and lets her touch a skein. She turns to her mother, who gently shakes her head. The colored thread is too costly. But the girl's brief joy adds a spark of warmth to the chilly air. As you walk the perimeter of the market, you notice a group of villagers gathered around a fire pit built in the center of the square. They warm their hands and share jokes. A man roasts chestnuts, handing them out in exchange for small favors or shared stories. The shell cracks beneath your fingers as you peel one. The nut inside is sweet and soft, warming your mouth instantly. The crowd thins as the sun begins its slow descent, and the cold intensifies. People gather their goods, pull their cloaks tight, and begin the journey home. The market square quiets, its early bustle settling into a gentle hush. You help the family pack their trades onto the sled. The mother's basket is fuller now. Legumes, metal buttons, a small jar of dried berries, and a few other precious items. The father's sled holds the dried fish and a bundle of straw mats purchased cheaply from a neighbor who wove too many this season. As you make your way back along the snow-covered path, you hear laughter drifting from behind you, children racing home, villagers calling farewells. The winter sky softens into a shade of lavender, and smoke rises from chimneys like threads of ink. By the time you reach the cottage, your boots are dusted with fresh snow. The mother sets the basket on the table, and the father stores the new supplies carefully near the hearth. Winter markets may be simple, meager by modern standards, but to these villagers, they are lifelines, places where trade, rumor, friendship, and survival weave seamlessly together. And tonight, as the cold deepens beyond the shuttered windows, the family feels a little richer, a little safer, and a little more connected to the world beyond their walls. The warmth of the market lingers in your thoughts long after the family returns home, but winter seldom grants more than a brief pause. The next morning brings a sky heavy, with dull, metallic light. The kind of sky that warns you snow is thinking about becoming something worse. You step outside with the father, who carries a length of rope coiled around his shoulder and a long staff in his hand. Today he must check the traps scattered along the forest paths and bring back any supplies caught in the night. Travel in winter is never simple, and each step on icy ground demands attention. Accounts from medieval travelers often describe winter journeys as deceptively dangerous, less because of storms and more because silent hazards lurked beneath every layer of snow. You pull your cloak tighter against a thin wind that slices across the landscape. The boy follows you both, eager yet cautious. His boots crunch rhythmically in the fresh crust of snow. The father nods for him to stay close, and together you head toward the narrow track leading away from the village. The path is faint today, half buried under drifts that arrived silently in the night. The father prods the snow with his staff before each step, testing for hollows or ice slicks. You watch his movements carefully. Instinct guides him. He knows the terrain beneath the snow almost by memory, the hidden routes that might trip him, the shallow ditches that disappear under a white veil, the spots where the ground slopes gently enough to make a fall dangerous. A small yet clever winter habit surfaces in your mind as you proceed. Some villagers scattered handfuls of ashes onto their paths before walking, giving themselves a visible line to follow home. Today, the faint smears of grey beneath the snow reveal that the father used this trick last week. Even half covered, the trail helps orient your eyes. The forest looms ahead, its branches bending low under the weight of ice. When the wind blows, the trees creak with long, aching sounds, as though complaining about the burden of winter. The father stops near the first snare, buried under a thin cover of powder. He brushes the snow aside and finds the loop untouched. No catch here. He resets the snare carefully and moves on. The boy spots the next one before either adult does. He darts forward but stops immediately when the father raises his hand. The boy waits, shifting from foot to foot. The father moves ahead, clearing snow with deliberate sweeps of his staff. The snare has caught something small, a hare, frozen still in the cold. The father retrieves it with quiet respect, murmuring thanks under his breath. Winter makes hunters thoughtful. You feel the solemnity of the moment settle into the snow around you. A few steps later, the wind picks up again, pelting your face with tiny shards of ice. You lift your gloved hand to shield your eyes. Visibility shrinks, and the father motions for everyone to pause. Winter storms often arrive without warning, and even a mild one can erase paths with startling speed. Some researchers continue to discuss how winter navigation worked in the Middle Ages, Given the lack of sophisticated tools, many villagers relied on landmarks, a crooked oak, a boulder shaped like a crouching animal, the line of a frozen creek. Today, the father studies the trees, comparing their silhouettes against memory. His gaze moves with confidence, though the snow disguises everything. Still, he knows how to read the forest in winter, and after a long moment, he gestures forward again. You continue along the path, though the wind now nudges your cloak sideways. The boy walks closer to the father, gripping the hem of his coat. His breath comes out in rapid puffs, yet his eyes remain wide with determination. Every winter journey shapes him. At the third trap, the father crouches to inspect the snow. Tracks scatter around the snare fox tracks. The trap lies sprung but empty. The boy squints at the prints, trying to read the story they tell. The father explains quietly how the fox approached, tested the snare, and cleverly slipped the bait without being caught. Nature's intelligence leaves its signature in the snow. A little farther along, the forest opens onto a frozen stream. Its surface glitters like dull glass under the cloudy sky. The father tests the edge with his staff. The ice cracks faintly, not enough to break, but enough to warn you. You step back instinctively. In winter, sound is as important as sight. A single misjudgment can plunge someone into deadly water. The father chooses a safer crossing, a narrow fallen tree bridging the stream. He helps the boy across first, placing one hand on the child's shoulder. You step onto the log next. The bark is slick, but the father's guiding hand keeps you steady. On the far side, the snow seems deeper, hugging your boots like sand. A nearby hillside is dotted with hoarfrost, delicate crystal structures clinging to twigs and grasses. The boy brushes his fingers along them, watching the crystals break apart in tiny bursts. Even in hardship, winter offers moments of beauty that spark wonder. As you continue, the soundscape shifts. The wind falls silent, replaced by distant bird calls. A crow caws harshly from a high branch, shaking loose a cascade of snow. The boy jumps as the snow hits the ground with a muffled thump, then laughs quietly. Fear and amusement weave together during winter journeys. You soon reach another set of traps. One contains a small mound of feathers, likely a bird that escaped. The father resets it with practiced efficiency. Another trap nearby remains untouched, its loop still perfectly formed above the snow. You notice deep footprints here, larger than any you have seen so far. The father kneels, brushing aside the powder. A deer passed through recently. The tracks are fresh. He touches them gently, considering their direction. Then he rises, shakes his head, and continues forward. Hunting deer in deep snow is nearly impossible without risking safety. The family will rely on smaller catches. A faint drizzle of snow begins to fall. Not thick, but constant. It blankets your shoulders and settles into the creases of your cloak. The boy sticks out his tongue to catch a few flakes and grins, despite the cold creeping into his boots. Soon, you reach the outer limit of the family's trapline. The forest darkens here, dense and quiet. The father approaches the final snare carefully, brushing the snow aside. This one holds another hare, smaller than the first, but still precious. The father ties it securely to the sled, murmuring thanks once again. The return journey begins, and though the path is familiar, it feels heavier now that the wind has returned. This time it pushes from behind, urging you onward. Snow falls more thickly, softening the edges of the world. The father checks behind him frequently to ensure the sled doesn't tip. By the time you reach the stream again, the log bridge is buried under a fresh layer of snow. The father clears it with his staff and guides everyone across. Your breath deepens, fogging in the cold air. The village roofs appear through the curtain of snow like small islands rising from a white sea. Relief spreads quietly through the group. Inside the cottage, the mother greets you all with warm hands and a warm smile. She helps remove the snow-heavy cloaks and leads the boy to the hearth. The hares are placed on a table where she can prepare them later. The father shakes snow from his boots and rubs his hands near the fire, the red glow reflecting in his tired eyes. Traveling through winter is no simple errand. It demands awareness, strength, and humility. One wrong step can turn routine into danger. But today, the family returns safe, with food in hand and stories to share. You settle near the hearth, still feeling the cold in your bones. Outside, snow continues to fall, quietly erasing tracks and softening the world again. But inside, warmth gathers, and the memory of the snowy path lingers like a footprint in your thoughts. The warmth of the hearth gently thaws the lingering chill in your hands and feet, and for a while the cottage settles into a peaceful quiet. But as evening comes on, the mood in the room shifts. Not toward fear, but toward a kind of alert attentiveness that medieval winters often carried with them. The dying light paints long, trembling shadows across the floor, and the wind outside whistles softly, threading itself through narrow gaps in the wall. In these months, when cold presses close and the nights stretch endlessly, the unseen becomes easier to imagine. Throughout Europe, villagers carried countless winter beliefs, charms, and whispered stories that helped them make sense of the season's darker edges. Folklorists today often remark on how winter heightened the need for symbols of protection. The children sit closer to the fire tonight, their eyes reflecting the glow like polished amber. The mother brings out a small bundle of dried plants tied together with red thread. She hangs it near the door. The boy watches with interest, recognizing the gesture. This small charm, made from rosemary, yarrow, and a sprig of bay, is meant to invite good health and ward off misfortune. It is simple, but symbolic. Once it is in place, the girl retrieves a small clay bowl from the shelf. Inside it rests a mix of crushed lavender and mint. She sprinkles a pinch onto the hearthstones, where it releases a faint, pleasant aroma as it warms. The mother says it refreshes the house. The girl repeats the phrase with quiet pride. A local tradition recorded in a few scattered manuscripts drifts into your mind. Some households believed that refreshing scents kept wandering winter spirits from lingering near the home. Whether or not people believed fully in such spirits, the comforting smell must have brought a sense of calm during long, cold nights. The father takes a wooden carving from a niche in the wall. It is a small figure, possibly representing a saint or an older symbolic protector. Its surface is smoothed by generations of handling. He places it near the window, facing outward, as though watching for danger. He does this without ceremony, like a daily gesture carried into old habit. Not everyone in history interprets these customs with the same seriousness. Some scholars argue that such practices were casual folk habits passed down without deep meaning, while others insist these rituals carried profound emotional weight. Sitting in this cottage, watching them unfold quietly and naturally, you sense that meaning lies somewhere in between. Part comfort, part tradition, part belief, part habit, woven together as tightly as wool thread. A soft knock suddenly jolts the room. The boy gasps. The girl tenses slightly, but when the father opens the door, it is only a neighbor returning a borrowed pot. Still, the momentary suspense reveals how easily winter's quiet amplifies every sound. The neighbor steps inside just long enough to warm their hands near the fire. They mention seeing a strange flicker of light near the forest's edge, perhaps another traveler, perhaps nothing more than moonlight on snow. The father listens thoughtfully. In winter, even small oddities spark curiosity. After the neighbor leaves, the mother begins telling a story while she works near the table. Her voice is low, rhythmic, almost like chanting. It is customary in some villages for parents to share winter tales in the evenings, partly to entertain, partly to teach caution. Tonight, she tells of a figure said to roam during deep winter nights, a woman dressed in white, whose footsteps never leave prints in the snow. She is neither threat nor guardian, depending on whom you ask. The girl listens with rapt attention, sitting perfectly still. The boy tries to appear brave, but keeps glancing at the shadows behind the hearth. Another type of winter belief comes up as the tale ends. The girl mentions that her grandmother once said the wind carries voices on nights like this. The father chuckles gently, ruffling her hair. He does not dismiss the idea outright. In this world, it is common to entertain a little mystery. The line between superstition and metaphor is thin, shaped by long nights and older stories. The sick child stirs softly, waking just enough to listen. The mother soothes them with a touch, then hums the final lines of her story until the child drifts back into sleep. Her voice seems to knead the air into something softer. Outside, the wind changes direction. It blows in a low, steady moan that wraps around the cottage like a distant chant. The father rises to check the shutters, pressing cloth more tightly into the seams. The girl helps by securing a wooden peg he had loosened earlier. When the wind cries louder, both children pause, exchanging a quick look. The boy whispers that maybe the wind is warning of snow. The father nods, saying the old-timers believed wind like this means the weather is deciding something. He returns to the table and retrieves a small pouch filled with coarse salt. Some villages place salt near thresholds or windowsills in winter, not only to keep moisture away but also as part of symbolic protection rituals. Tonight, The father sprinkles a pinch near the door. The gesture is quiet and unremarkable, but even you feel its calming effect. A faint tapping on the roof draws your attention upward, perhaps snow sliding from the thatch, perhaps a small animal seeking warmth. The children huddle closer to the fire. Your senses heighten in response to the layered sounds. The wind, the soft drumming above, the shifting beams, the fire whispering against the logs. The mother resumes her work, now lighting a small tallow lamp. She places it on a low shelf. The flame steadies, the shadows flickering on the walls, reducing the strangeness of the room. The boy leans forward, watching the flame carefully. It glows golden, filling the air with a faint scent of melted fat. You sense that winter beliefs thrive not because people are fearful, but because the season invites wonder. Long nights encourage imagination. Strange sounds echo more sharply. Dim light creates shapes that appear alive, and the moments of uncertainty spark stories that pass from elders to children, becoming threads that stitch communities together. The girl sits with her hands folded, thinking deeply. She finally asks the father whether snow can listen. The father smiles, saying that snow listens only to footsteps and remembers their warmth. The mother laughs softly, adding that the snow also remembers kindness. Whether spoken in jest or belief, the words soothe the room. As the evening deepens, the family begins their quiet rituals for rest. The mother checks the herbs above the door. The father ensures the carved figure remains steady by the window. The children wrap themselves in blankets with practiced movements. The fire glows low, but steady enough to see everyone's faces soften in its light. Outside, the wind settles into a gentle murmur. Inside, the cottage feels wrapped in protective calm. Superstitions, traditions, charms, and whispered tales all weave together, forming a subtle armor against winter's long night. You settle down too, realizing that belief, whether symbolic or sincere, brings warmth of its own. And tonight, every tiny ritual feels like an ember glowing in the dark. Morning arrives without ceremony, just a slow brightening of pale winter light pressing through the shutters. The family stirs gradually, warming stiff fingers near the small flame the mother coaxed from the embers. Breakfast is simple today, just leftover stew thinned with water, but it is enough to steady everyone for the tasks ahead. When the father stands and reaches for his cloak, the older girl joins him almost immediately. Today they must track the daylight carefully. In winter, time itself becomes something slippery, fragile, easily lost. Medieval households managed their days not by clocks, but by sun, shadows, habits, and the subtle cues woven into daily rhythms. Writings from monastic communities often describe how deeply people relied on natural signs to navigate their long, cold months. You step outside with them, inhaling the sharp morning air. The sun hangs low, weak as a candle behind a thin veil of clouds. Its light stretches long shadows across the snow, turning the landscape into a quiet mosaic of white and silver. The father pauses, squinting at the sky. He reads its faint color to judge the hours he has before dusk. A pale yellow wash near the horizon suggests a short day ahead, perhaps snow later. He nods to himself, calculating silently. The girl watches him closely, trying to understand what he sees. He points toward the distant tree line, explaining that when the sun rises barely above those trunks, the day will end early. She nods, absorbing the lesson. It is not an academic explanation. It is practical wisdom, passed from one winter to the next. A small, charming bit of seasonal custom drifts into your mind as you watch them study the light. Some villagers believed that if their shadows appeared long and clear in early morning, the day would remain calm. If shadows were blurred or missing, weather might shift suddenly. Whether or not the belief was rooted in fact, it offered a gentle way to read the world when the sky refused to speak plainly. Back inside, the mother begins her own winter ritual for keeping track of time. She takes a small stick of beeswax and marks one of the wooden beams with a short line. These tiny marks trace the passing days since the solstice. She does not need exact dates. She needs only to feel the gradual lengthening of light, the slow march toward spring. The girl sometimes adds her own marks, tiny scratches that blend into the grain. Not everyone in the historical field agrees on how widespread such practices were. Some scholars emphasize structured religious calendars as the primary system, while others highlight the informal methods used within family homes. Watching the mother now, you sense both working together. The church bells mark feast days, but the beam in the cottage marks lived days, the ones that really shape winter survival. The father and girl return outside, to check the length of the morning shadow cast by the cottage itself. It stretches long and thin across the snow, telling them what they already suspected. Today's daylight will be brief. The father taps his staff on the snow and begins measuring the approximate path of the sun in his mind. He will need this knowledge later, when chores pull him farther from home. The boy emerges next, rubbing his sleepy eyes. He struggles to judge the time in winter, since the sun barely moves across the sky. The girl crouches and draws a simple line in the snow, showing how she guessed the time yesterday. The boy grins, then draws his own line beside it, crooked, but enthusiastic. She corrects him gently, guiding his hand. In the distance, the church bell rings a low, steady tone. It marks the second hour after sunrise, a signal villagers rely on, even through thick snow. The sound carries like a deep hum across the frozen landscape. Shopkeepers, shepherds, and travelers adjust their tasks instinctively. A farmer trudges past with a pair of buckets. He greets the family and comments on the quality of the morning light, speculating whether the day will hold or collapse into storm by evening. The father replies thoughtfully. Their exchange is brief but meaningful, a shared attempt to read the day before it unfolds. Inside the cottage again, the mother lights a tallow candle marked with faint notches carved along its side. These marks tell her roughly how long it will burn. Not all candles are used for timing, but this one's purpose is special. She lights it on days when the family must keep track of tasks with more precision. The wax melts slowly, creeping toward the next notch. When the flame reaches it, she will know it is time to turn the dough, stir the stew, or call the children inside before cold bites deeper. You watch the flame flicker, casting dancing patterns across the walls. The candle is both timekeeper and comfort. A low whistle of wind passes through the eaves. The boy glances up, wondering if it means the day is shifting. The father reassures him that wind alone does not decide the hours. Only the sky does. The boy nods, filing the lesson away. Meanwhile, the girl takes a bundle of sticks outside and arranges them in a small row. She places them at an angle she observed from her father, a makeshift snow sundial. It will not be exact, but it will teach her how the sun's direction shifts even when its glow is weak. She glances down at the sticks every few minutes, noting which ones cast shadows longest. A fascinating observation from period diaries comes to mind. Some villagers used the shapes of shadows on their house doors to guess the time of day, even when the sky felt nearly colorless. The wooden latch might carry a narrow shadow at midday or a thick one near dusk. This simple method required no tools, only attentive eyes. As the morning progresses, the fire burns brighter inside the cottage. The mother watches her marked candle closely. When the flame touches the second notch, she rises to prepare the midday stew. Without clocks, tasks rely on practiced timing and a deep awareness of routine. She moves like she has done this 1,000 times, guided less by minutes and more by instinct, sharpened by necessity. Outside, the father teaches the boy how to gauge midday by listening. The church bell will ring once, but the quality of animal cries, bird calls, and even the distant sound of merchants moving through the village can hint at the hour. Sound becomes another form of winter clock. The air grows colder as the sun climbs only a finger's height above the tree line. The father notes this, muttering that daylight is already turning back toward dusk. The girl confirms it by pointing at her snow sundial. The shadows have shifted again, longer now. She beams proudly at her discovery. Back inside, the candle flame nears another notch. The mother hums softly, stirring the stew as the children warm their hands. The cabin fills with a slow, comforting rhythm. Soft whispers, crackling wood, the occasional thump of the cat jumping down from a shelf. The father returns, stomping snow from his boots, and sits beside the fire. He watches the candle as well, acknowledging its quiet authority. Each notch is a gentle reminder that even in winter's deepest stillness, time moves. Another bell rings across the frozen village. Its tone is mellow, carrying through the air like a thread of sound weaving homes together. The cottage quiets for a moment, the family listening. They know this bell marks the middle of the day, even though the sky seems barely brighter than morning. Time in winter feels stretched, blurred, softened. Days do not move in clean slices, but in waves shaped by work, weather, and the tilt of the sun. Yet somehow, the family knows exactly what must be done next. You watch the final sliver of morning slip into afternoon, guided by shadows, voices, candles, and tradition. In this world, the clock is not a device. It is a landscape, a sky, a fire, a sound. And as the hours fold quietly into one another, you feel yourself settling into this rhythm too, carried along by the soft, unhurried pulse of wintertime. The afternoon light grows thinner, turning the snow outside a soft shade of grey, as the father rises from the hearth with a familiar heaviness in his shoulders. He exchanges a quiet glance with the mother, and you can tell this is the moment he has been bracing for all day. Firewood. That stubborn, daily concern that shapes every hour of winter life. Modern readers might underestimate its weight, but historical accounts, estate documents, and rural letters all highlight the same truth. In winter, firewood is survival itself. Food can stretch, blankets can be patched, strength can be rationed, but without wood, none of it matters. The father steps toward the door, ready to brave the cold again. You follow him outside as he pulls the door shut, sealing the warmth behind you. The cold feels sharper now, the type that cuts rather than lingers. Snow crunches beneath your boots as he leads you to the woodpile near the barn. What you saw yesterday now looks smaller. Winter always makes the pile look smaller. The father stands still for a moment, studying it as though calculating not the wood itself, but the days it represents. The air carries a faint metallic scent, laced with the smell of frozen earth. A crow calls from a barren tree overhead, shaking loose a small flurry of powdery snow. The father ignores it, kneeling beside the pile to inspect the logs. He lifts one, knocks it lightly against another, listening to the sound it makes. This is how he judges dryness. A hollow thud means it will burn well. A dull thump means trouble. A small and lesser-noticed winter habit comes to mind as you watch him test the logs. Some villagers believed that a piece of wood that sang when struck was blessed against the cold, making the hearth burn brighter that night. Whether anyone believed it fully, the custom added a touch of hope to a task that otherwise felt endless. The father picks up a long-handled axe and begins splitting the larger logs into burnable pieces. His movements are slow but powerful, each swing carving warmth for future nights. The sound of the axe slicing wood echoes across the open space. You notice how he paces himself, exhaling in steady bursts. Too much force risks injury. Too little risks inefficiency. Winter rewards balance. Not all historians agree on whether wood shortages were constant or seasonal. Some regions had plentiful forests, while others struggled, especially when landlords imposed restrictions on gathering fallen branches or cutting dead trees. Watching the father work, you sense the anxiety woven into his movements. Every log is precious, even here where trees line the horizon. The boy emerges from the cottage to help, bundled thickly in his wool layers. He carries a smaller hatchet, clearly too light for serious chopping, but perfect for trimming bark or evening the edges of split logs. He moves with enthusiasm, eager to contribute. The father gives him a nod of approval. In winter, learning to manage firewood becomes as essential as learning to speak. Together they work in a slow, synchronized rhythm. The father splits. The boy clears the chips. You help stack the finished pieces in tight rows, ensuring air can circulate between them. Stacking wood is an art in itself. Poorly stacked logs absorb moisture from the snow, becoming useless. But a well-built stack becomes a wall of warmth, waiting to be released. The wind shifts suddenly, blowing snow across the yard in thin, swirling sheets. The father pauses, scanning the sky. A dim, pearly haze gathers near the horizon. A coming storm. This adds urgency to the work. Storms can keep families indoors for days, making these last minutes of daylight critical. He moves to the other side of the barn where a second, older woodpile leans against a stone wall. This one is made of remnants, awkward shapes, half-rotted pieces, rough branches. The boy wrinkles his nose at the sight, but the father explains quietly that these will become kindling. In winter, nothing is wasted. As you gather the smaller scraps, the cold bites deeper into your fingertips, even through your gloves. The snow beneath your boots grows uneven, compacting, then slipping slightly with each step. Your breath comes out in quick bursts. Even simple tasks become taxing under winter's grip. A small fox appears at a distance near the tree line, its reddish coat a stark contrast to the pale landscape. It watches curiously before darting away. The boy points excitedly, but the father simply smiles. Wildlife sightings are tiny gifts in winter, reminding people the world still has life moving quietly through the frost. Back at the cottage, the mother and girl open the door to carry in the freshly cut logs. The warm air spills out again, wrapping around you like a soft blanket. The girl places the logs in a neat stack beside the hearth, organizing them by size. She sets aside the smallest pieces for kindling, placing them in a clay bowl near the fire. Each size has its purpose. Inside, the sick child awakens briefly, drawn by the sound of the wood being carried. They smile weakly and whisper something to the mother, who places a hand on their forehead with gentle reassurance. Even the sick, even the weary, feel comfort knowing the hearth has enough fuel. The father enters last, shaking snow from his shoulders. His beard glitters with tiny crystals. The mother brings him a warm cloth for his hands, and he holds it gratefully. His breath slows, his shoulders loosen. The day's most pressing task is complete for now. But the ritual does not end there. Managing firewood is a constant cycle. The father sorts through the logs with careful attention, selecting the driest ones for tonight. He taps each piece lightly to judge its quality, listening to the subtle tones that only he understands. A surprising detail from rural tradition surfaces as he arranges the wood. Some families placed a single evergreen branch atop their freshest stack, believing it encouraged the rest of the wood to dry properly. Evergreen, after all, symbolized life that endured through cold. The girl finds a small pine bough by the door and places it on the stack, smiling proudly at her contribution. Not all winter tasks invite ritual, but firewood often does. Its importance encourages habits, beliefs, little customs passed quietly down the generations. The father crouches by the hearth next, testing the embers. He arranges the logs gently, feeding the fire in slow breaths. A small flame catches, then grows, painting the room with orange and gold. The children inch closer, hands outstretched. You can feel the shift immediately. The cottage warms, the shadows soften, the air hums with comfort that only fire can bring in a season like this. Dinner preparations begin with more ease. The mother ladles broth into a pot. The boy shows the father his trimmed wood chips. The girl sings softly as she sets the table. Even the sick child watches contentedly from their bedding. Firewood might seem simple now, in your world of heating systems and thermostats, but here, it is the difference between hope and hardship, between rest and shivering, between night and survival. The father settles into his seat at last, muscles tired but spirit steady. The woodpile outside may still shrink with each passing day, but tonight, there is enough warmth, enough safety, enough peace. You sit beside the fire, feeling its heat soak into your bones. Outside, the storm builds slowly. Inside, the family prepares to face it with wood stacked high and hearts softened by the glow of a job well done. The storm begins sometime after dusk, not in a violent rush but in a slow, deliberate thickening of the air. You notice it first when the wind softens its voice, trading its sharp whistle for a muffled hush. Then the snow starts to fall. Heavy, dense flakes drift from the sky like handfuls of feathers shaken loose by invisible hands. By the time you step outside with the mother and father to check the water supply, the world feels quieter, dimmer, softened at the edges. The family walks with deliberate care toward the well, which sits a short distance behind the cottage. Wells are lifelines in winter, but they are stubborn, needy things. Water freezes easily, and villagers must attend to it daily to keep it flowing. Historical notes from rural parishes frequently emphasize the winter battles with frozen wells, clogged buckets, and sluggish streams that turn to ice overnight. The father lifts the wooden lid of the well, a thin lid only, meant to keep snow out, not cold. He peers inside, lowering the small lantern he carries. The light flickers against the rough stone walls, revealing a thin crust of ice forming across the surface. Nothing dramatic, but enough to complicate the morning's chores. He sets the lantern aside and reaches for the iron rod leaning against the stone. With steady, practiced movements, he breaks the ice. It cracks in delicate patterns before yielding completely, splintering into floating shards that sparkle like broken glass in the lantern glow. The sound echoes upward, hollow and cold. The boy watches, fascinated, his breath fogging the air. A small but clever winter custom resurfaces in your thoughts as you watch the father clear the ice from the bucket. Many villagers lowered a smooth round stone into the water each evening. The stone, kept clean and heavy, bobbed just beneath the surface and helped prevent a thick freeze forming. Tonight, you notice such a stone glistening inside the well, and the father nods with approval when he spots it. Smart preparation pays off. The mother helps lift the bucket, now freshened with cold, unfrozen water. She pours it into a small wooden tub, careful not to spill even a drop. Water is as precious in winter as firewood. Fetching more means enduring this storm again, so she guards what she has. Not all scholars agree on how often wells froze solid, but most sources mention at least occasional freeze-over in harsher winters, forcing villagers to break ice daily or even seek water from nearby streams. Today, the well remains usable, but the father gestures toward the stream beyond the tree line. He fears tomorrow may be different. The snow continues falling thickly as you make your way toward the stream. The path grows difficult to see, disappearing under fresh drifts. The girl joins you now, carrying a basket lined with linen. The basket will hold the ice. She plans to bring back ice. She will melt near the hearth if the well freezes entirely. She walks carefully, her eyes sharp and thoughtful. The stream lies locked beneath a glassy crust of ice, thicker than the wells but not yet fully solid. The surface glints under the fading light. The father tests it with the rod, striking gently at first. The ice responds with a deep, resonant thud that vibrates along the banks. Then he strikes harder, cracking open a small pocket of water beneath. A spray of droplets leaps into the air, freezing instantly into tiny crystals that fall like glitter to the ground. The girl dips her hand into the freezing water, filling the linen-lined basket with chunks of ice. The cold bites at her fingers, and she winces slightly, but continues. The father steadies her wrist when the basket grows too heavy. The boy helps pack snow around the ice to slow its melting. Every gesture shows cooperation, small hands learning to share the burden of winter water. A curious observation from several old farming claims enters your thoughts. Some villagers believed that cracking ice on a stream woke the water, keeping it alive and flowing through difficult months. Whether symbolic or not, the act itself certainly prevented deeper freeze. Today's cracks might mean the difference between refreshing water tomorrow and a dangerously solid sheet of ice. The walk back to the cottage grows slower as the storm thickens. Snow presses against your clothes, gathering in folds and hood edges. The wind grows heavier too, not violent, but insistent, pushing gently, yet constantly at your back. You lean into it, following the dim outline of the cottage through whirling flakes. Inside, warmth envelops you immediately. The mother sets the tub of water near the hearth. The girl places the basket of ice beside it, adjusting the cloth so melting water will collect neatly. The father closes the door, sealing out the wind, and rubs his hands together to chase away the cold. The storm builds outside. Snow strikes the shutters with a soft thrum. The sound is steady, rhythmic, like a distant drum calling the world to sleep. The fire inside crackles in opposition, glowing brighter as the room darkens. The sick child stirs, perhaps awakened by the shifting noises outside. The girl brings them a warm cloth soaked in a bit of the newly fetched water, wiping their forehead gently. The child sighs and relaxes again. The mother sits near the hearth and begins to warm the first pot of snowmelt. She feeds it into the larger pot until it reaches just the right temperature for washing hands and preparing food. Snowmelt water tastes different, lighter somehow, but it sustains life just the same. Not all regions relied equally on snow as a secondary water source, but in places where wells froze solid or streams narrowed under ice, melting snow became an essential winter skill. You watch the mother test its purity by lifting a spoonful toward the light. She nods, satisfied. The boy, curiosity piquing, asks why melted snow tastes so faint. The father explains simply, "Snow forgets the earth." The phrase seems poetic, but also practical. Snow carries fewer minerals than well water, so its flavor is gentle, almost empty. A sudden crack outside makes everyone pause. Perhaps a branch has snapped under heavy snow. The father listens closely before relaxing again. Winter nights hold many sounds, not all dangerous, but all worth listening to. The mother places a jug of water near the hearth, but far enough that it will not boil. Water too hot wastes fuel when it must be cooled for drinking or cooking. Balancing temperature becomes a quiet, daily ritual. The girl arranges the ice carefully, packing it near the wall where cold seeps through, ensuring it will last until morning. She touches each piece as if thanking it for the effort it will save tomorrow. Snow continues its steady descent outside, softening the world into gentle silence. But inside the cottage, warmth and light hold strong. As you settle near the fire, the steady drip of melting ice from the basket becomes another winter sound, soft, rhythmic, almost musical. It marks time differently from the candle or the church bell. It marks survival. Tonight, the family rests knowing that water waits in many forms, in the well, in the stream, in the snow itself. Each one demands work, but each one answers the same essential need. And in this frozen world, every drop counts. The storm outside deepens through the night, but by morning its force has softened. When the family wakes, the cottage feels unusually quiet, insulated by thick new snow. The fire still glows with a thin line of embers, and the mother stirs them gently until a small flame returns. The air smells of damp wool and faint herbs left simmering in yesterday's water pot. As everyone adjusts to the morning chill, another kind of winter rhythm rises to the surface. Today will be a day spent mostly indoors, and inside these walls, work never truly sleeps. Historical household accounts make it clear that medieval winters turned cottages into workshops, humming with necessary tasks from dawn until dusk. When icy winds made long journeys unwise, or when snow buried familiar paths, families shifted their focus inward. You can feel that shift now as the father stretches his shoulders and reaches for a bundle of tools while the mother begins sorting materials across the table. The girl fetches the wooden mallet and a cloth bag of small nails she and her brother gathered last week. The boy brings a pile of worn wooden handles, pieces that once belonged to tools but fractured under strain. Today is the day to mend them. Repairing tools is winter's quiet backbone. Without it, spring work would collapse under the weight of broken implements. The father sits on a low stool near the hearth, where the light is strongest. He picks up an old rake handle, examining the crack along its length. With a steady hand, he trims the damaged section, then shapes a new end with a small knife. Wood curls to the floor in thin ribbons, releasing a faint, earthy scent. The boy sweeps them aside, saving the larger curls to use later as kindling. Near the wall, the girl works with her mother to prepare wool for spinning. She pulls apart tangled tufts, teasing them into long fibers. The fibers cling to her fingers, soft yet stubborn. A small detail from rural life, often mentioned in winter notes, comes to mind. Families sometimes sang in low voices while carding or sorting wool, believing the wool became smoother under calm hands. Today, the girl hums softly, and whether it affects the fibers or not, the work seems gentler for it. The mother warms her hands near the fire and retrieves the spindle. She begins turning wool into thread, the spindle whirling gently in a familiar rhythm. The sight mesmerizes you every time. The transformation feels like magic, though it is nothing more than skilled patience. Each length of thread she spins may become part of a new shirt, a blanket patch, or even a repair to a drafty corner of the house. You listen to the soft whir of the spindle, the bright taps of the father's mallet, the gentle brushing of wool fibers, and the children's quiet chatter. Indoors, winter has its own music. Not every historian interprets indoor winter work in the same way. Some view these months as a time of domestic creativity, even comfort. Others argue they were simply an extension of survival, demanding constant effort regardless of the weather. Watching the family now, you can see traces of both viewpoints. The tasks are essential, but there is meaning woven into them too. Skills practiced, stories shared, hands warmed. The boy joins his father next, holding a broken wooden spoon whose handle snapped days ago. Rather than discarding it, the father trims the jagged end, drills a small hole through the base, and inserts a narrow peg he carved earlier. With a few taps of the mallet, the spoon becomes whole again. Not perfect, but functional. The boy beams, running his thumb along the smooth new seam. Winter teaches the value of small triumphs. Across the room, the mother and girl shift to weaving. They place reeds and scraps of old cloth across a simple wooden frame. The girl weaves the layers tightly, her fingers moving quickly between the slats. This new mat will sit under one of the animal stalls, or perhaps beside the hearth, to insulate the floor. Every woven piece has purpose. Every scrap contributes to warmth. A curious little detail from some old rural writings filters through your thoughts. People sometimes used broken baskets or badly frayed mats to stuff wall gaps during especially harsh winters. You glance at the fraying mat in the corner and suspect it may serve that purpose soon. The father now sharpens blades, small knives, a sickle, and a dull hatchet. The scraping sound against the sharpening stone rings rhythmically. Sparks sometimes leap in tiny flashes when metal meets grit. The boy watches wide-eyed, holding the sharpening stone steady on his lap. This moment is both lesson and tradition. Near the hearth, the mother mixes dough for a new loaf of barley bread. The girl assists eagerly, dusting flour from her palms onto the table. Kneading warms their hands and fills the cottage with the promise of food. The scent of grain rising from the bowl seems to thicken the very air. When the dough is set aside to rise, the girl returns to her wool. She threads a small needle, and begins stitching patches onto a thin blanket that has lost much of its insulation over the years. Her stitches are tight and even. She learned them from her mother, who learned them from hers. The thread in her hands carries generations in its quiet tension. The sick child wakes, their breathing easier than yesterday but still weak. The mother brings them closer to the hearth, settling them on a soft mat. The girl reads them a story from memory, reciting a tale of a traveler who braved deep snow to find a village of warm fires and shared meals. Her voice is calm and gentle, wrapping the narrative in warmth. The child listens with half-lidded eyes, comforted by the familiar cadence. The boy, unable to sit still much longer, picks up a small wooden whistle he's been carving. He smooths its edges with a small knife, stealing glances at his father to ensure he is doing it properly. The father offers occasional murmured advice, not turning from his own work but attentive enough to guide him. The boy's craft is far from finished, but the pride with which he holds it matters more than the outcome. The wind outside presses lightly against the shutters, but the cottage stands firm. Indoors, the labor continues undisturbed. The mother shapes the loaf, brushing the top with melted fat to help it brown. The father fits a newly carved handle onto the door latch. The children fold newly finished mats. The mother pauses at one point and massages her fingers, tired from spinning. The father notices and gently nudges the spindle closer to the girl, who picks it up without complaint, eager to help. There is no hierarchy here, only shared necessity. A faint crack sounds in the corner, where a small board shifts against the cold. The father grabs a wooden peg and mallet, tapping it into place. These tiny repairs form the invisible scaffolding of winter survival. You breathe in the layered fragrances of bread dough, warm wool, wood shavings, and hearth smoke. The cottage feels like a living organism, every breath, every gesture, every sound contributing to its endurance through the season. Eventually, the rising loaf is placed near the fire. The mother wipes her hands and joins the family in a brief moment of rest. The father stretches his arms. The boy sets down his carving. The girl closes her eyes for a moment. The sick child falls back asleep, wrapped in soft wool. Winter holds them inside, but inside, they create warmth with their hands, their voices, and their quiet persistence. The storm outside may reshape the world with snow, but indoors, these small, steady actions reshape survival. You watch as the family resumes their tasks, working together in a harmony carved from centuries of tradition. And you realize that the sound of winter work, scraping, stitching, cracking, spinning, is more comforting than any lullaby. Evening drifts in softly, its grey light thinning until the world outside the shutters feels distant and muted. The storm has eased into a gentle whisper, the kind that lingers without threat. As the mother prepares the evening stew and the father checks the last of the mended tools, an unexpected sound breaks the steady rhythm inside the cottage. A sharp knock. Not hurried, not desperate, but firm enough to send the children glancing at each other with wide eyes. Winter rarely brings surprise visitors, unless necessity pushes them through the snow. The father stands, wiping his hands on his cloak, and moves to the door. When he opens it, a burst of icy air sweeps into the cottage, not violent, just forceful enough to make the fire flicker. Framed in the doorway is a traveler. His cloak is heavy with snow, his boots nearly white from the drifts. His breath fogs in great clouds as he nods in greeting. Travelers in winter are uncommon, but not unheard of. Medieval paths saw peddlers, messengers, wandering monks, and sometimes people simply trying to reach the next village before nightfall. The father steps aside, gesturing for him to enter. Hospitality in winter is not optional. Church teachings, village customs, and simple human wisdom all agree. Turning away a traveler in the cold is a dangerous sin, if not morally then practically. A guest tonight might be the host next season. The traveler thanks the family softly, his voice roughened by cold. Once inside, he pulls down his hood, revealing a face reddened by wind. The mother immediately hands him a warm cloth to thaw his hands, and the girl offers a small cup of warm broth. The boy stares shyly but curiously. Strangers bring stories, and stories are winter's richest entertainment. A small detail noted in several medieval diaries resurfaces as you watch this exchange. Travelers often carried small tokens to show they came in peace. Twigs tied with string, distinctive pouches, or even bits of bright cloth pinned to their cloaks. Tonight, you notice a red cord tied near the traveler's shoulder, a sign he belongs to no roaming bandits, but rather a known trade route. He thanks the family again, his voice gentler now that warmth is seeping back into him. He sits near the hearth, letting the heat soak into his boots. The sick child stirs at the sound but settles again when the girl places a calming hand on their arm. The father asks quietly where the traveler is headed. The man replies that he aims for a village beyond the woods, hoping to reach it before full darkness. But the storm slowed him, and he feared losing the path entirely. His pack is light, far too light for the season. Likely he has traded much of his goods already, or perhaps he travels with more urgency than comfort. Not all historians interpret the presence of winter travelers the same way. Some argue they were rare, seen only when absolutely necessary. Others claim that trade networks kept roads busy even in cold months, especially for those delivering letters, collecting debts, or carrying church messages. Here, the truth feels simple. Some journeys could not wait for spring. The mother offers him a seat at the table as she ladles stew into bowls. The aroma rises immediately, warm and hearty. Barley, dried peas, a hint of yesterday's salted meat. The traveller accepts the bowl with both hands, closing his eyes briefly as if savouring more than the taste, perhaps the relief of safety. He begins to speak between slow spoonfuls. He talks of a neighbouring village where sickness has spread. Not a plague, thankfully, but a persistent fever, leaving many homes exhausted. He describes broken bridges coated in ice, a cart overturned on a steep path, and a merchant whose mule slipped on frost, forcing him to abandon his cargo. The children listen wide-eyed at every detail. Even the father leans in, concerned by the mention of sickness. Winter illnesses spread easily, carried by travellers and wind alike. The mother, hearing this, rises to fetch fresh herbs she dried in autumn. She offers the traveller a small pouch, telling him to brew it in hot water at the next hearth he reaches. He accepts the gift with deep gratitude. A curious bit of folklore echoes in your thoughts. In some regions, families believed that offering herbs to a traveller brought blessings on the household, as though generosity held its own protective magic. Watching the mother's gesture now, you understand how such a belief might form. The traveller continues sharing stories, about a wandering monk who passed through a village singing hymns in exchange for shelter, about a tinker who built metal charms, said to keep wolves at bay, about a snowstorm so dense that an entire farm disappeared from view until its roof was nearly buried. The boy sits close, nearly spilling his broth in excitement. The girl glances toward the father each time the traveller mentions a faraway place. Her eyes hold quiet longing not for escape, but for understanding more of the world beyond their fields and woodland paths. The father asks if wolves have been spotted nearby. The traveller nods slowly, explaining that he saw tracks near the lower ridge 2 nights ago, not close enough to alarm, but close enough to caution. The father's jaw tightens, and he places another log on the fire, as though strengthening the hearth strengthens the home. You notice now that the traveller's boots are soaked through. The mother gently lifts them nearer to the hearth to dry, placing wooden supports beneath to prevent scorching. She offers him a spare pair of wool socks. He hesitates. Such gifts are not given lightly in winter, but she insists with a firm nod. He accepts them, bowing his head. The girl brings out the small wooden bird the boy received at the market and shows it to the traveller. He smiles warmly and tells her he once knew a craftsman who carved birds so lifelike they fooled real sparrows. The children gasp in delight, unsure whether the tale is truth or playful exaggeration. A sudden gust of wind rattles the shutters. The fire flickers. The traveller glances toward the door, as if measuring whether the storm outside has quieted enough for him to leave. But the mother gently insists he stay until morning. The father agrees. The storm will only grow colder as night deepens. Roads vanish easily under such snow, and even a seasoned traveller might lose his way. The traveller nods, accepting their hospitality. The father prepares a place near the fire, laying out spare blankets and a straw mat. The traveller removes his cloak, revealing a small leather satchel tied at his belt. He places it beside the mat and sits down heavily, exhaustion settling over him like another layer of snow. The mother hands him a warm drink, thin ale heated near the fire. He takes slow sips, finally relaxing. His shoulders drop, the tension melting from his posture. For tonight, he is safe. And so is everyone in this room, warmed not only by fire but by the presence of another soul sharing their small island of light in the winter dark. The sick child opens their eyes briefly, sensing the newcomer. The traveller offers a small wave. The child smiles faintly, reassured. As the family prepares to rest, the storm continues to murmur outside, but it feels less menacing now. Inside the cottage, The glow of the hearth reflects off many faces, familiar and new. Visitors in winter can bring information, warnings, burdens, or kindness. Tonight, the house holds a little of each. And as you settle down beside the fire, you sense how welcoming a stranger can strengthen a home, warming it from the inside out. Night settles deeply around the cottage, curling its cold fingers against the walls, but inside, the warmth of shared presence lingers. The traveller sleeps lightly near the hearth, wrapped in spare blankets, his breathing steady but cautious, like someone accustomed to resting with one ear always open. The fire glows low, orange embers shifting gently with each breath of the draught. You lie awake a moment longer, listening to the layered sounds of sleep, the soft rasp of the father's breathing, the mother murmuring in a dream, the subtle wheeze of the sick child. Winter nights have a way of stitching these sounds together into a single, fragile melody. When morning arrives, the cottage brightens with a thin, filtered light. Snow pressed against the shutters blunts the sunrise, making the day appear softer than it is. The mother moves first, stretching her fingers before rekindling the fire. The smell of warming air returns slowly, carrying hints of last night's stew. The traveller wakes soon after, sitting up with a quiet groan as he rubs the stiffness from his shoulders. He looks older this morning, the weariness of long travel more visible in the gentle furrows near his eyes. But he thanks the family warmly, his voice smoother than it was last night. A night beside the fire has restored some of his strength. Breakfast is simple porridge thinned with melted snow and a few scraps of dried fruit, but it is enough. The traveller eats gratefully, blowing gently on each spoonful. The boy sits close, studying him with unabashed curiosity. The girl keeps glancing at the satchel tucked beneath the traveller's arm, wondering what secrets or stories it contains. Once breakfast ends, the traveller begins preparing for departure. He shakes out his cloak, now dry, and ties the satchel securely at his belt. The mother hands him a small parcel wrapped in cloth. Inside are the herbs she offered last night, along with a thin slice of the fresh barley bread she baked. He tries to refuse, but she lifts her chin in that gentle, insistent way of hers. So he accepts, bowing low. A lesser-known winter practice surfaces as he prepares to step outside. Some travellers believe that tying a small knot in their cloak string before heading into heavy snow helped bind the path to them. Whether symbolic or practical, the gesture reminded them to stay focused and steady. You notice the traveller's fingers hover near his cloak ties, a moment longer than necessary. Not all scholars are aligned on how far such small rituals spread. Some argue they were scattered, isolated traditions. Others believe they formed a quiet thread of shared culture among people who relied on intuition as much as skill. Watching the traveller now, you sense the importance of belief in a treacherous season. The father offers to walk him partway to the main path. The traveller agrees, understanding how easily fresh snow can erase landmarks. The boy rushes to put on his boots, eager to join, but the father gives him a small shake of the head. The storm left drifts nearly as tall as the boy's knees. This morning's walk is for adults alone. The traveller crouches and places a hand on the boy's shoulder, thanking him for the company last night. He then turns to the girl, praising her careful listening and telling her she will be wiser than many grown folk someday. She blushes fiercely, hiding her face behind her scarf. The mother smiles, brushing the girl's hair back with affection. Outside, the storm's remnants blanket the world in thick white. The father steps out first, testing the depth of the snow with his staff. The traveller follows, adjusting his cloak against the chill. Their footprints sink deep, crisp outlines that trail away from the cottage. The girl watches from the doorway, hugging her shawl around her shoulders. The mother eventually eases her inside, but she lingers one more moment, tracking the two figures until the snowfall swallows their shapes. Inside, the boy asks again where the traveller might be headed. The mother kneels beside him, explaining gently that sometimes people must walk long distances even in winter, because someone is waiting for them, because work calls them, or because hope lies further down the path. The boy thinks about this quietly, then nods. The mother turns her attention to the hearth. She stirs the embers, adding a fresh log. Flames leap up, filling the room with renewed warmth. The sick child stirs, and she brings them water warmed by the fire. Their breathing sounds clearer today. Not perfect, but steadier. She places a kiss on their forehead before rising. While the father is away, the children settle into morning chores. The girl gathers scraps of cloth to finish a patch on the family's heaviest cloak. The boy sweeps near the door, pushing away snow that drifted inside when the traveler left. His broom grazing the floor makes a soft brushing sound that blends with the crackle of wood. A curious detail emerges as you watch them work. In some communities, it was believed that sweeping first thing in the morning cleared not just dirt but lingering misfortune. Whether symbolic or simply practical, the act brought a sense of renewal. The girl finishes her stitches, holding the cloak up for inspection. The mother praises her, smoothing the seams with her fingers. The girl beams, proud of her work. Every skill she learns this winter will strengthen her for seasons to come. A sudden gust of wind presses against the shutters, shaking them lightly. The mother glances toward the window, checking for frost patterns. Long, branching crystals stretch across the edges, catching the morning light in delicate webs. She traces one with her fingertip, then nods. This pattern suggests the air is drying slightly, a small sign the day may stay cold but stable. Meanwhile, the father returns sooner than expected. The traveler insisted on walking alone once the path grew more visible. The father closes the door behind him, brushing snow from his cloak. He reports that the traveler seems strong enough to finish the journey. The mother exhales softly, relieved. The children pepper him with questions. Did the traveler tell more stories? Did he really see wolves? Did he leave quickly? The father smiles and answers patiently. Then he reaches into his cloak and reveals a small wooden charm the traveler pressed into his hand before parting. A token of thanks, a round disc carved with a simple sun pattern. The girl gasps softly. The boy touches the charm reverently. The mother places it near the hearth, saying sunlight in winter is always welcome, even if carved from wood. Not all winter visits end so peacefully. Many historical mentions describe travelers arriving ill, lost, or desperate. But today, fortune wrapped itself in a cloak of snow and departed with hope intact. The father sits by the fire, stretching his cold fingers. The mother brings him a warm drink. The children cuddle near the hearth, the sick child resting contentedly in their bedding. The charm glows faintly in the firelight. Outside, the world remains white and quiet. Inside, the family carries on with a renewed sense of connection not just to each other, but to the wider world stitched together by footsteps across winter paths. And as you sit listening to soft voices and gentle crackling fire, you realize this truth. Sometimes, the presence of a passing traveler can deepen the warmth of a home long after the door closes. The morning drifts into a muted, shimmering calm after the traveler departs, as though the world itself is catching its breath. Sunlight, faint and pale, struggles through a sky still heavy from last night's storm. The snow outside lies untouched except for the traveler's fading footprints. Inside the cottage, a rare stillness settles. Work pauses for a heartbeat. Even the children grow quiet, sensing an unusual softness in the day. But winter allows no long rest. Soon the father lifts his head, listening toward the animal's byre. A faint, uneven bleat reaches through the walls. You know instantly what it means. One of the goats is uneasy. The animals have endured the storm too, huddled together in a small pocket of warmth. The father stands, pulling on his cloak and boots, and gestures for you to follow him. You step outside, your breath rising in pale clouds. The air smells clean, sharp, and lightly metallic. Snowdrifts curl against the cottage wall, like small frozen waves. You move toward the byre with care, the ground still slippery beneath the top layer of fresh powder. Inside the barn, the smell of animals and old straw wraps around you. The cow shifts her weight, watching the newcomers with gentle curiosity. The goat bleats again, stamping her hoof impatiently. A thin layer of frost clings to the wooden beam above her stall. Winter presses even into sheltered spaces. The father kneels beside her, running his hands along her legs, checking for cold clumps or stiffness. He finds the issue quickly, packed ice wedged between her hooves, making her steps painful. This is a familiar winter problem, mentioned often in livestock notes from manor estates. Farmers knew these small issues could spiral into serious trouble if ignored. He retrieves a small wooden tool from the wall, a hoof pick carved from ash wood. With steady hands, he clears the ice gently, murmuring soft reassurance to the animal. The goat tilts her head, calmer now, as though she recognizes the ritual. When her hooves are clean again, the father spreads a bit of warm ash beneath her, creating a dry patch for her to stand on. The boy arrives next, carrying a bucket of warmed water. He dips his hands in it, squealing at the heat. The father laughs and shows him how to pour a small amount into the goat's trough, without letting steam billow too much. The scent of warm water can attract rodents, if spills freeze into sweet-smelling crusts. A curious detail from rural lore floats into your thoughts. Some farmers sprinkled crushed mint leaves in animal stalls during winter, believing the scent eased tension in nervous goats. You notice the girl doing just that now, scattering a pinch near the edge of the stall. Whether or not it calms the animals, the barn smells faintly fresher for it. Not all researchers agree on how heavily winter animal care burdened medieval families. Some argue livestock were hardy enough to withstand deep cold with minimal support. Others emphasize the constant vigilance required, breaking ice in troughs, checking hooves, adding straw, repairing drafts. Standing here now, watching the family tend to each creature deliberately, you sense how deeply survival depends on these small acts. The father moves next to the cow, checking her udder and sides. He runs his fingers along her flank, feeling for any hardening that might signal illness. The cow responds with a low, contented hum. The girl approaches with a bundle of fresh straw, spreading it in a thick layer. The sound of the straw crackling beneath her feet fills the barn like soft static. She pauses when she sees a small feather stuck to the cow's side, likely from a hen wandering in search of warmth yesterday. The girl plucks it gently and tucks it behind her ear, a tiny keepsake of winter's oddities. Outside, a crow calls loudly. The father glances toward the open barn door, then steps out to investigate. You follow. The crow hops across the snow, pecking at a frozen clump. Its black feathers shine almost blue in the cold light. The boy emerges behind you, trying to mimic the crow's call. The crow caws back indignantly and flaps onto a fence post. As you stand there, a gust of wind lifts loose snow into a delicate spiral, dancing briefly before settling again. The world is mostly silent. Even the forest seems to hold its breath. Back inside the barn, the mother has joined the children. She checks the hens, who roost together in a fluffed cluster like a single breathing creature. She lifts one gently, checking for frostbite on its comb. Satisfied, she returns it to the group. The mother opens a small clay jar filled with crushed grains. She sprinkles a measured handful along the floor. The hens flutter down, pecking eagerly. Their movements leave tiny patterns in the straw like stitched threads. A small, lesser-known practice resurfaces in your mind. Some villagers believed hens laid better eggs in winter when kept near warm objects, so they placed smooth, heated stones wrapped in cloth near the roost. Today, you notice such a stone tucked near the wall. It radiates only faint warmth now, but the intention remains clear. The boy rushes to the pig's pen next. The pig snorts loudly, shifting through its bedding in search of hidden treats. The boy laughs and checks its snout for frost crust. The pig nudges him affectionately, its breath warm against his gloved hands. The barn fills with soft noises, the rustle of straw, the gentle chewing of the animals, the quiet hum of the mother's voice as she murmurs encouragement to the hens. Winter work has a calmness to it, not because it is easy, but because it is familiar. Then an unexpected sound ripples through the air, the faint crack of a distant tree splitting under ice. The father pauses and listens. The forest is full of such voices in winter. Some trees endure, some yield. He waits for a moment before returning to work. Not all threats in winter come from cold or hunger. Some come from the sudden collapse of limbs heavy with ice. Families listen closely for such sounds, knowing they can signal fallen paths or damaged roofs. The father finishes inspecting each animal, ensuring they are warm, dry, and well fed. Before leaving the barn, he closes the shutters tightly and checks each latch. The storm left weakened spots in the walls, and he patches two with extra straw. Back at the cottage, the mother prepares a warm mash for the goat, made from barley scraps and a bit of leftover stew. The goat devours it with grateful enthusiasm. The children giggle as bits of mash cling to her whiskers. Inside, the sick child watches with a tired smile from their bedding. Seeing the animals cared for seems to ease them, as though the health of the barn somehow mirrors the health of the family. The father removes his gloves, flexing his fingers near the fire. The mother hands him a cup of warm broth. Steam rises gently between them. You can see in their eyes the quiet satisfaction of a chore done well, a small but essential victory against winter. The girl sits beside you, brushing loose straw from her sleeves. She tells you softly that when spring comes, the animals will roam freely again, and the barn will smell of fresh grass instead of cold wood. Her voice carries a mix of longing and certainty. For now, though, winter rules, and caring for the animals becomes a daily act of devotion, one that keeps the family and their future alive. As the fire crackles softly, The family gathers for a short rest. Outside, the sky remains pale and quiet. Inside, the warmth of the barn's completed work settles over everyone like a blanket. In winter, tending animals is more than labor. It is a reassurance that life persists, breathing steadily through frost and silence. The snow outside settles into a calm stillness by midday, leaving the world wrapped in a thick, muffled hush. Inside the cottage, the fire burns with steady warmth, the mother's loaf cools on the table, and the children play quietly with bits of yarn and carved wood. After the morning's barn tasks, the family deserves a brief pause, but winter allows only small crumbs of rest before the next duty calls. Today, that duty is the storehouse. When the father stands and reaches for his cloak again, the mother looks up sharply, her expression tightening with the familiar worry that surfaces whenever the storehouse door must be opened. Human history hides few things as quietly as these winter structures, yet they appear prominently in estate inventories and village records. They are the beating heart of survival, precious and vulnerable in equal measure. You follow the father and mother outside. The girl bundles herself up and comes to, while the boy remains inside to watch the sick child. Snow creaks under your boots, deep and dry. A faint wind stirs loose powder into delicate spirals. The storehouse stands at the far edge of the yard, built from thick timber boards, its roof low and heavy, to keep heat trapped inside. Careful construction, born from centuries of learning. When the father unlocks the door with a wooden peg, a cold draft escapes, tinged with earthy scents, grain, straw, cured meat, dried herbs. You step inside. The space is dim but orderly. Bundles of root vegetables line one wall, wrapped in straw to prevent rot. Cabbages hang from beams, their outer leaves dry and crisp, but their hearts still firm. Baskets of onions exhale their sharp, familiar bite. A few jars of beans sit sealed with wax. Near the back hangs the salted meat, precious strips darkened by smoke and time. Each piece represents hours of labor from the year before, tending pigs, feeding them, curing their flesh, preserving what they could. The mother's eyes linger on the meat with both gratitude and calculation. They must make it last. A small, intriguing detail from rural households emerges as you look around. Some families buried carrots or turnips in sand-filled barrels to keep them fresh through winter. Today, the father lifts the lid of one such barrel. Inside, bright orange roots sleep safely beneath fine grains of sand, cold but unspoiled. He removes two carefully, brushing the sand away before handing them to the mother. Not all researchers agree on how sophisticated medieval storage techniques truly were. Some argue these methods were crude guesswork. Others point to their surprising effectiveness. Here, in the cool air of the storehouse, you see both sides. The methods are simple, yet ingenious enough to preserve life. The mother checks the grain sacks next. She presses her hand deep into the oats, feeling for moisture or pests. Her fingers emerge dusted in pale flecks, and she nods. The grain is dry, safe. She taps the sack lightly with satisfaction. The girl carries a small lantern, illuminating the corners. Spiderweb-draped rafters, clay jars, old wooden crates, a few dried apples hang from a string, their shapes shriveled but sweet-smelling. She inspects them, choosing one with care. The mother encourages her to take it. Fruit is scarce at this point in winter, and the girl's eyes brighten at the treat. A crackle outside makes the father pause. He sets his hand on the doorframe and listens. Perhaps an icicle falling, perhaps a branch snapping under snow. Winter noises sometimes imitate danger, and families learn to distinguish them by tone. This one, he decides, is harmless. The mother opens a small chest and reveals a handful of beeswax cakes saved from last summer. She knows exactly how many remain. Wax is needed for candles and salves, essentials that shrink too quickly, if not rationed carefully. She selects one small cake and closes the lid. You notice a clay jar tucked in a corner, half hidden by straw. When the mother lifts it, the scent of herbs fills the storehouse. Inside is dried thyme, mint, and a little sage, the last true medicinal herbs available until spring returns. She checks the supply carefully, face thoughtful. Enough for a few more months, if used sparingly. Shelves near the door hold a row of clay pots filled with preserved broth fat, each sealed with a rind of hardened grease. This fat flavors thin winter soups and provides much-needed calories. The father tests each seal with his thumb, making sure none have loosened. A faint scratching sound draws your attention to the lower wall. The father kneels and finds tiny tracks in the straw, Mice. Persistent winter visitors. He sets a small trap, a wooden box, balanced on a stick with bait inside. The girl whispers a small good luck charm over it. The father smiles. Whether charm or habit, every gesture helps. A lesser-known practice recorded in village notes becomes clear as you watch them work. Many families rotated their stored goods regularly, moving older items to the front and newer ones to the back. The mother now does the same, shifting root vegetables and grains to ensure nothing spoils unnoticed. Organization becomes a quiet weapon against hunger. The father lifts a wooden lid covering a pit dug into the storehouse floor. Inside lies a cache of frozen fish wrapped in linen. Ice glimmers around the edges, preserved perfectly in the winter cold. The father checks each piece before lowering the lid again. This hidden store is insurance against late storms. The girl climbs a small ladder to inspect the hanging onions. She squeezes each one gently, feeling for softness that might signal rot. One onion yields too easily under her fingers. She removes it and hands it to the mother, who tosses it outside for the animals. Waste is sorrowful, but unavoidable. The mother counts jars, measuring their supplies mentally. She moves in small, precise motions that reveal years of practice counting, deciding, saving. Winter transforms this room into a ledger of survival. Meanwhile, the father tests the structural integrity of the storehouse. He presses on walls, checks beams, examines the door hinge. A single crack in the wrong place could allow cold, moisture, or animals to destroy months of stored food. The girl watches him closely, absorbing each gesture. A sudden gust rattles the door. Loose snow trickles from the roof. The lantern flickers. The family stops working for a moment, listening. The father steadies the doorframe. Then, slowly, the wind settles back into silence. You feel your breath deepen. The storehouse holds more than food, it holds time. Every jar, every vegetable, every dried leaf represents hours of labor from warmer months stored here like trapped sunlight. The mother gathers the chosen items: 2 carrots, a handful of onions, a few dried herbs, a small beeswax cake. The father collects 3 logs from the stack inside, stored for emergencies, and the girl holds her single dried apple with reverent joy. Before leaving, the father gently closes the door and slides the peg back into place. The storehouse sinks again into its quiet, cold slumber. Back inside the cottage, the warmth feels brighter, richer, now that you have seen what waits in the silent, shadowed room at the edge of the yard. The mother sets the vegetables on the table and begins preparing the evening meal. The girl nibbles her dried apple in slow, savoring bites. In winter, every storehouse visit is a reminder of the delicate balance between enough and not enough, between planning and hoping, between what the earth gives and what it hides away. Tonight, that balance holds firm. By the time evening begins to fold itself across the sky, the family has moved through another full cycle of winter tasks. The hearth glows warmly, carrying the sweet smell of cooking carrots and onions from the storehouse. The sick child breathes more easily now, and the parents share quiet glances of relief. Yet, as the day winds toward night, a new kind of stillness settles over the cottage. It is the gentle, anticipated quiet of a long winter evening, the kind that invites voices, stories, songs, and shared reflection. Medieval winters were not only seasons of hardship, they were also seasons of storytelling. Manuscripts, travelers' notes, and collected oral traditions reveal how deeply people leaned on tales to fill the dark hours. Tonight, you sense that the family is ready for stories. Once dinner is finished and the bowls cleaned, the father settles on his stool by the fire, stretching his legs toward the hearth's glow. The mother wraps herself in a shawl and sits beside him, her knitting in her lap. The children bundle together like a cluster of sparrows, eyes bright with expectation. Even the sick child, though still weak, pulls their blanket closer and leans toward the flames. The father begins the evening's first tale. His voice carries a steady warmth. He speaks of a winter many years ago, when a blizzard nearly buried the village. According to the story, the wind howled like an angry spirit, and the snow piled so high that villagers dug tunnels between their cottages. The children gasp and laugh when he describes how a neighbor's goat wandered through the tunnels and caused momentary chaos. The father's tone is calm but vivid, shaping scenes with careful details. A small, charming detail from rural traditions surfaces as you listen. Families often repeated their favorite tales every winter, claiming that stories themselves helped keep the walls warm. Whether scientifically true or not, voices do soften the cold. You can feel the cottage relaxing into the rhythm of sound. When the father finishes, the boy begs for another. The mother smiles and nods to the girl, who shyly begins her own tale. It is one she learned from her grandmother. A story about a clever farmhand who tricked winter spirits by pretending to be colder than they were. She uses her hands to illustrate the spirits creeping through forests and knocking snow from branches. Her gestures make her siblings giggle. Not everyone agrees on the purpose of winter storytelling. Some scholars insist tales reinforced community bonds. Others believe they acted as moral lessons or reminders of seasonal wisdom. Listening now, you sense that stories serve many roles at once: distraction, comfort, education, and joy. As the girl's tale ends, the boy jumps in with one he has been practicing. His story is short, mostly silly, something about a rooster who tried to outcrow the church bell, but his delivery makes everyone smile. His hands move wildly, his eyes shine. Even the father laughs when the boy flaps his arms like a rooster in dramatic defeat. After laughter fades, a quieter atmosphere settles in. The sick child lifts their head and whispers a request, one of the old winter legends. The mother nods softly, placing her knitting aside. She begins a story spoken in a low, enchanting tone. It is about a mysterious figure said to wander during the coldest nights, a gentle guardian who checks on children as they sleep, leaving traces of frost on window panes. The mother's voice moves slowly, like drifting snow. The children listen with wide eyes but without fear. Her story is shaped with comfort, not menace. A soft crackle rises from the fire. Outside, the wind hums faintly, but it feels distant, subdued by the warm hum of storytelling. The shadows on the walls dance with the flames' movement, swaying like actors in the stories themselves. The father takes another turn, telling a tale of a farmer who once tried to plant seeds in midwinter, convinced he could outsmart the cold. The children shout their predictions and laugh when the father reveals that the farmer ended up feeding hungry birds instead. The humor is gentle, threaded with the lesson that nature has its rhythms. You notice the mother watching the father fondly as he tells the tale. The lines of tiredness soften on her face. Storytelling becomes its own kind of rest for the mind, if not the body. Then the boy asks the question that often ends winter storytelling. Do the trees hear us? The father smiles, and replies that trees hear everything, though they speak slowly. The girl adds that in winter, trees listen more carefully because there is less noise in the world. The mother agrees softly. A curious little detail from rural folklore surfaces. In some villages, people whispered kind words to fruit trees during winter, believing it encouraged better growth come spring. The girl mentions this tradition proudly. The father nods, acknowledging how custom intertwines with care. The sick child murmurs sleepily, requesting one last story, one without spirits or lessons, just something peaceful. The mother strokes their hair and tells a short tale about a shepherd who spent winter nights listening to the stars. Her voice slows, the story stretching like a warm blanket. She describes the shepherd lying beside his flock, watching the sky breathe light into the snow. The child's eyes drift closed. Not all medieval nights were calm, but this one feels like a gift. A gentle reminder that warmth is not only fire and blankets, but voices shared in a quiet room. The father reaches for a small wooden mug hanging by the hearth, his evening drink of warm ale diluted with water. The mother sips a bit of herbal tea. The children whisper between themselves, reenacting parts of their stories. The fire pops softly, sending a spark upward. The shadows ripple like ink. You lean back, letting the sounds of the room wash over you. The girl's quiet whisper, the boy's sleepy giggle, the mother's soothing breaths, the father's deep, steady voice as he hums a tune older than memory. Even the sick child smiles faintly in their sleep. Inside this cottage, the world feels warmer than the season should allow. You realize that winter storytelling is more than entertainment. It is an anchor, a ritual that brings the family together, reminding them that the world beyond the snow still holds joy, imagination, and connection. Outside, snow continues to fall in slow, lazy drifts. Inside, words drift like embers, glowing in the hearts of those who hear them. As the last tale fades into comfortable silence, you feel the weight of winter ease, just a little. The last story of the evening settles into the warm air like a feather drifting to rest. For a few long breaths, the cottage is wrapped in a hush, so gentle it feels like part of the fire itself. The children lean against one another, eyelids drooping, the sick child drifting in and out of shallow dreams. Outside, the wind shifts slightly, brushing soft waves of snow against the shutters. Winter's voice has grown quieter tonight, as if respectfully listening. The mother rises first, stretching her arms slowly before checking the pot hanging near the hearth. The stew inside simmers softly, its scent weaving through the room in a warm ribbon. She stirs it carefully, then turns toward the father, who nods in approval. They will save the last ladlefuls for tomorrow's morning meal, every portion stretched, every ingredient honored. But tonight, something feels different in the cottage lighter somehow, as if the long days of labor and worry have led to this gentle exhale. This is the moment when winter feels less like an enemy and more like an old, stern guardian watching from outside the door. You sit near the hearth, letting your hands hover over the gentle heat. The fire burns in a slow, steady rhythm. Embers glow like tiny beating hearts. The cat curls into a tight circle at your feet, its fur warmed by layers of air that ripple upward in shimmering waves. You listen, absorbing every detail of the room, the soft whicker of the cow in the byre, the small clicking sound of cooling wood in the rafters, the faint pop of sap burning in the fire. These sounds are the quiet heartbeat of the family's world. The father stands, stretching his back before moving to the tools lined neatly by the wall. He inspects each one with careful eyes, making sure nothing has cracked in the day's cold. Even now, this late, he works because winter never fully sleeps. He sets aside a wooden handle that needs smoothing tomorrow, then nods in satisfaction as he returns to his seat. A small, lesser-known habit from some rural communities filters into your thoughts. People often whispered thanks to tools at the end of the day, believing gratitude kept them strong and reliable. Whether the father believes in such things or simply respects his tools from practice, the quiet nod he gives them carries a quiet reverence. The girl shifts her weight, pulling a newly woven mat toward her. She examines the edges, smoothing them with her fingertips. She has grown noticeably in skill this season. Winter shapes not only the body, but the spirit. She places the mat near the wall, pleased. The boy yawns loudly, hiding his face in his scarf. The mother laughs gently, brushing his hair back. She tells him he must rest soon. He protests softly, insisting he is not tired, even as his eyes droop like heavy shutters. The sick child stirs next, blinking weakly. They whisper for water. The mother quickly brings a small cup warm near the fire. The child sips tiny amounts, then relaxes again, their cheeks a little less pale than yesterday. Recovery is slow in winter, but progress, even the smallest kind, feels like a miracle. The father moves toward the hearth and adjusts the logs again. He places 2 thicker pieces on the embers, angling them so they will burn slowly through the night. The family cannot risk the fire dying before morning. You watch as the flames catch, lifting a little brighter, throwing shadows across the walls like soft, dancing silhouettes. The girl sits beside you now, resting her head on her knees. She watches the flames with an expression half dreaming, half thinking. It is the look of someone absorbing the world with quiet wonder. She mentions softly that when she grows older, she wants to learn how the forest makes the type of wood that burns longest. The father hears her and smiles, promising to show her once the snow melts. Not all experts agree on whether families taught such knowledge intentionally or simply through repetition. Yet here, you see learning unfolding like breath in the cold, natural, constant, woven into every gesture. The mother returns to the table, taking a small beeswax candle and trimming its wick. She lights it, watching the flame rise into a steady glow. She places it beside the sick child, explaining that a little extra light keeps the night gentler. The candle brightens the child's face with a warm sheen, and they seem to rest more peacefully. You move closer to the window. Frost patterns stretch across the glass in intricate shapes, branching crystals, curled edges, delicate spirals. The father once said that frost draws pictures of the cold's own dreams. Tonight, those dreams are quiet, soft, and oddly beautiful. The distant sound carries over the snow, perhaps a dog barking 2 houses away, perhaps a tree settling under its icy burden, perhaps the muted ring of the church bell carried by shifting air. Winter distorts sound, bending it into echoes that feel both near and impossibly far. The mother listens, then shrugs gently, knowing that not every sound is a threat. When she settles near the hearth again, her eyes reflect a mixture of fatigue and gratitude. She strokes the girl's hair. She tucks a blanket around the boy, who is already half asleep. She glances lovingly at the father. Their partnership, forged through countless winters, holds a quiet strength that radiates through the room. As the evening deepens, the family moves into their nighttime routine. The children settle into their bedding. The father lowers the shutter latch, ensuring that nothing will push through the cracks. The mother lays her herbs beside the fire for easy access during the night. The sick child is comforted with one last warm cloth. Slowly, slowly, the cottage descends into its nightly rhythm. The shadows stretch longer, the fire softens, the cat settles deeper against your feet, and the family trades weary smiles as they rest in their familiar places, wrapped in homemade blankets, warmed by the knowledge that they have survived another winter day. Tonight, the room glows not with brightness, but with belonging, with a sense of accomplishment that only comes from meeting winter head-on and finding that, for one more day, you have won. When the father extinguishes the small candle, the darkness settles gently, like feathers drifting onto fresh snow. Only the hearth remains lit, glowing steadily, whispering its ancient promise of warmth. You breathe in deeply, letting the safety of the cottage sink into you. This is the heart of winter survival, not just shelter, not just fire, but connection, care, love carried in small, persistent gestures. And as the family drifts into sleep around you, the world feels both vast and sheltered, frozen and warm. And now, as the fire in the cottage fades into a gentle bed of ember-red light, you feel everything around you grow slower, softer, quieter. The snow outside settles into its own silence, drifting in slow spirals that barely seem to fall at all. The wind loosens its hold on the world, offering instead a long sigh that drifts past the shutters like a final whisper before sleep. Inside, the cottage breathes with an easy rhythm, each member of the family wrapped in warmth and exhaustion and gratitude, their breaths rising and falling like small waves against the shore of winter. You sit a while longer, letting the calm seep into your bones, letting the glow of the hearth fill the spaces where cold once lived. The shadows on the wall sway more slowly now, their movements softened, stretched thin by the stillness of night. Each sound grows gentle, distant, and safe. The rustle of blankets, the soft exhale of the sleeping children, the faint crackle of wood settling into ash. You feel the story settle too, lowering itself into the quiet like a bird folding its wings, content, at last. The long journey through winter days and nights becomes lighter, its edges blurring into something warm and comforting. You sense the deep peace of a world at rest, a world built from small acts of care, steady hands, and the quiet triumph of survival in the coldest months. So let your breathing slow, let your shoulders ease, let the echo of the fire's last warmth linger across your thoughts as they begin to drift. The winter night is safe, the cottage is safe, and you are safe too. Sweet dreams.